the front door to Jason Patrick's house suddenly burst open, and a group of nighthawks in black tweed coats jogged inside. They wore vigilant and alert expressions, as though they were facing an extremely terrifying enemy. Tap. 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 A person decked out in full silver armor walked in. The armor exuded a feeling that made it seem like it was abnormally heavy. Various details about it adhered to an ancient style, and from its left shoulder, all the way diagonally to the abdomen area, it was stained with a splash of dark red blood that appeared impossible to remove. Coupled with the sputtering red spots in other places, it created a very queer and beautiful scene, as if it was a unique and magnificent decoration. Soul-assurer Soist took out his pocket watch and gave it a look. Change. The silver armor stopped, lifting its visor to reveal the wearer. It was a handsome man with black hair and green eyes. Leonard, hot water has been prepared in the master bedroom's bathroom on the second floor. Don't delay any longer, otherwise, you'll only be able to return to the embrace of the goddess, Soist exhorted him. Yes, Captain Soist. Leonard Mitchell, with the help of the rest of the Nighthawks, removed his heavy blood-stained silver armor. With red gloves on, he didn't say anything, nor did he hesitate as he rushed to the second floor and found the bathtub still billowing with white steam. Leonard quickly stripped off his clothes and lied down in the hot water without even exposing his nose. His skin quickly turned red like a cooked lobster, and strange, scar-like silver lines gradually started to appear on the surface of his skin. Those silver lines were like pure blade beams which constantly spread outwards and fused with the hot water. In less than 10 seconds, the steam disappeared and a thin layer of transparent ice formed on the surface of the hot water. Only when all the silver lines dispersed did Leonard sit up, panting heavily. He cocked his head slightly as if he was listening to something. Then, he said with a lowered voice, "Old man, do you know the origins of 1 to 42? An elderly voice rang out in his mind. You are getting more and more impolite. I don't know where that strange armor comes from. Without waiting for Leonard to ask further, he let out a chuckle. But I think I recognize the owner of the blood. Who is it? Leonard asked curiously. The slightly aged voice said in a low, deep voice, an ancient god before the cataclysm. South of the bridge, Rose Street, Harvest Church. As soon as Klein stepped into the quiet prayer hall, he saw Father Utrovsky and vampire Emlyn White, one in the front and one in the back, sitting on chairs of different heights. Their hands were placed in front of their mouths and noses, with their fingers clasped together and palms empty. This was the unique prayer position of the Church of Mother Earth. Vox Novel Coem. Right now, Emlyn White's expression was gentle and calm, without any trace of the arrogance and vexation which he had before. Klein slightly moved the corner of his mouth as he silently drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. He took a seat at random, waited until the prayer was over, and then walked over to Emlyn White. He said with a smile, "You are especially pious today." What? Emlyn snapped to his senses as he muttered to himself while his expression was pale. What have I done, what have I done? His voice trailed off, as though recalling what he had just done. Maybe it's not a bad thing. Klein consoled the vampire in an utterly unconvincing manner before sitting down next to him. I don't want to hear others say something like that. Although I feel my resistance is weakening, Emlyn wore a livid expression and he said with a tone filled with despondence, but I don't want to betray the moon. Klein didn't continue with the topic that depressed the vampire as he casually asked, do you sanguines worship the primordial moon, or a particular deity that represents the moon? Or perhaps, the two of them can be considered the same? All of them. Emlyn slightly raised his chin. To a pure-blooded sanguine, we obviously believe in the deity that represents the moon. Of course, it is the god who represents the moon. Her name is Lilith, and she is the ancestor of us sanguine, an ancient deity. And when humans become sanguine, they tend to worship the primordial moon. Under normal circumstances, the two can be considered equivalent, but there are times when they do not overlap and there are differences. A human becoming a sanguine? Klein wasn't surprised that Emlyn White was able to say the name of an ancient god from the second epoch. Instead, he was more concerned about the tidbit about humans becoming sanguine. Is this the vampire sequence that Mr. Azek had mentioned? He thought. Emlyn said with a slightly complicated expression, yes, there are two types. One is transformed from a bestowment from a powerful sanguine, and the other is transformed from consuming a corresponding potion. The latter is our most hated enemy. Why? Klein vaguely guessed at the answer. Emlyn gritted his teeth and replied, the main ingredient of their potion is our blood essence. As expected. Klein turned his head and sized up Emlyn a few times. The gaze left Emlyn feeling a little nervous as he snorted. You're already a Beyonder, there's no way you can switch pathways. It's only because this is my first time seeing a walking, no, a living, no, talking Beyonder ingredient. However, in a certain sense, every human Beyonder is also such an ingredient. Klein originally only wanted to inwardly make a casual joke, but soon he felt a strong sense of sadness. At this moment, Emlyn looked at the Bishop Utravsky, who was carefully polishing the sacred emblem of life, and said in a low voice, I found two ingredients that you wanted. What are they? Klein didn't attempt to hide his joy. Emlyn responded smoothly, thousand-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland and blood. The asking price is £2,000 for the former and £300 for 100 milliliters of the latter. 2,300, Klein blurted out, can I get a discount? After receiving his bail money back, he had a total of £2,185 in cash. For a member of the middle class, this was already quite an abundant amount of savings. Perhaps some people might not be able to save that much money in their entire lifetime, but Klein found that it wasn't enough. No, if it weren't for me, he would have wanted £2,800, and according to the agreement, you would have paid me an extra £150 for a total of £2,450, Emlyn said while shaking his head. Looking at Klein's expression, he quickly added, in this era, dragons are rare. Other than the long-lived sanguine, it is very difficult to find similar Beyonder ingredients elsewhere. Even if they exist, they would be more expensive than ours. I'm still short of £265. Having saved up so much money with such great difficulty, it will be emptied out at once. Yet, I still don't have enough. I hope Mr. Hanged Man will be able to sell the werewolf Beyonder characteristic as soon as possible. After this, there's still the characteristic of a human-skinned shadow and a deep-sea Naga's hair. It wouldn't be any cheaper. There's no way to confirm Little Sun's side of things, with him needing to conduct himself properly. The amount he owes me is probably best repaid by using the means to remove a rampager's mental corruption in a mystical item. That would be a better form of concealment. Many thoughts instantly flashed through Klein's mind as he felt the light outside the window dim significantly. He took a deep breath and said, okay. However, this deal will be delayed for some time. I recently provoked a fellow and am now being protected by official Beyonders. You don't wish for that cellar to be locked up in the cathedral's basement, right? And I still have to gather the rest of the money. Klein tilted his head slightly to look at the cathedral's dome. Official Beyonders? Emlyn White jumped up and looked around. Klein glanced at him and said, don't worry about it. You're now a priest of the Church of Mother Earth, and you have legal status. Moreover, Bishop Utravsky will protect you. I'm not. Emlyn's denial was exceptionally weak. He sat down again and suddenly thought of something as he said, can the official Beyonders resolve the problem of a psychological cue? Maybe. Klein almost burst out laughing. But in that case, you will most likely become a believer of the Evernight Goddess, the god of steam and machinery, or the Lord of Storms. Of course, you can also choose to become a member of the military's special department. They might be able to send you overseas as a spy to seduce some noble woman. I only like puppets and pure, beautiful girls. Emlyn immediately emphasized. I can tell that you're a little interested, but only a little. Klein switched gears and asked, do you know any members of the Beria family? Beria? That crazy family that worships devils? No, they are devils themselves. Emlyn blurted out. Why are you looking for them? Klein helplessly said, I've offended one of them, Jason Patrick Beria, due to a serial murder case. Help me find out his recent whereabouts and acquaintances in your circle. If you have any accurate information, I will pay you, depending on the importance of the information. Of course, this could also be claimed from the Nighthawks, the machinery hive mind, and the military. Klein thought with relief. Emlyn nodded thoughtfully. You actually dared to provoke a real devil. When you have exact information about him, he will know that you will bring him a great deal of harm. It's all right, I have the protection of the authorities, Klein replied indifferently. After a few seconds of silence, Emlyn said, well, I'll try. The payment for information needs to be at least £20. After finalizing this matter, Klein didn't stay any longer, and he walked out of the cathedral. His mind was filled with the question of how he was going to gather the money. Miss Magician's new book is about to be published. She should receive a sizable amount of money for it. There will still be royalties later on. Perhaps I can promote the astrologer potion formula to her, however, she hasn't even gathered all the potion ingredients of Trickmaster. Miss Justice has joined the psychology alchemists, and I have no formulas to sell her. Sell her knowledge? The werewolf beyonder characteristic is worth about £1,300, perhaps even lower. Must I produce a mystical item? Or should I think of a way to get Emlyn White to become a believer of the Fool, receiving tributes at the cost of offering to remove the psychological cue? Right, Jason Beria carried a lot of cash, jewelry, and precious metals. If he can be found, perhaps I might get a share. As his thoughts raced, Klein walked out of the cathedral and saw the dark sky and the thin fog. He sighed and said, I'm really short on money. Back at Minsk Street, Klein walked into the bathroom with a thick stack of newspapers in his hand, as if he was about to fight a protracted war. He wanted to head above the gray fog and use Jason's handkerchief to divine his whereabouts. Inside the bathroom in 15 Minsk Street, Klein took out a paper figurine from a concealed pocket, shook it, and transformed it into a body double. He made the body double sit on the toilet with a newspaper in hand as a way to deceive others. Then, he hid himself in the shadows, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the gray fog. These series of actions were even more magical than magic. Inside the majestic ancient palace, Klein sat at the very end of the long bronze table, conjuring Jason Beria's handkerchief in front of him. It was only a projection, but it could also be used for divination as long as the handkerchief didn't leave his body in the real world. The earliest instance was back when he used the projection of the mutated sun's sacred emblem in Tingen City as a divination object. At that time, he still didn't know how to summon himself, and he was unable to bring items with spirituality above the gray fog. Of course, there was still a big difference between using a projection and using the actual object for divination, therefore, Klein often tried his best to use the actual object. But right now, with him being protected by official beyonders, it wasn't that convenient to carry out a ritual. If anyone were to find him lighting candles in the day while on the toilet, he would be in deep trouble. If I can really manage to obtain Jason Beria's location via divination, I can always take the risk by summoning myself and bringing the handkerchief up here if the revelation isn't clear enough. With a mumble, Klein produced a goatskin and a fountain pen. He wrote the divination sentence, Jason Beria's current location. Normally speaking, relying on a handkerchief that the target used only during a certain ritual made it impossible to divine the whereabouts of the target since the connection wasn't strong enough, and there was too much interference. For example, it was very easy to end up provoking the Abyss Grand Duke which the ritual was directed at. But for Klein, interferences could be eliminated. The so-called Abyss Grand Duke was at most a high-sequence devil, and not the incarnation of the dark side of the universe. Above the fog, the mysterious space had already handled deities like the eternal blazing sun and the true creator. Even a slightly weaker one was at the level of an angel, Mr. Door, and up to this point in time, he hadn't suffered any serious mishaps. As for the problem of the connection not being strong enough, Klein, who could only be enhanced to a certain degree by the gray fog, was helpless as well. He could only give it a try and try his luck. Perhaps it would only be after he became a high-sequence beyonder saint in this domain that he could have the corresponding confidence. Vox novel coem. In theory, it's possible. After all, when holding a ritual, one's body, heart, and mind were unified the most. It was also the easiest to communicate with the outside world. Klein, who was now barely considered an expert in mysticism, muttered. He held the handkerchief and the goatskin with the divination statement written on it, and he leaned back into his chair. He quickly entered a state of cogitation and constantly chanted, Jason Beria's current location. After chanting it 7 times, Klein fell into a deep sleep and entered the dream world. Within the gray world, countless images flashed and intersected with each other in a rather dispersed manner. Soon, the scene became clear and filled Klein's vision, which made him feel as if he had entered a dream. In the dream, the lights were dim and the desk was dark red. A figure was standing in front of the oriel window, looking out at the garden. There was a glass shed in the garden, with roses blooming inside, bright red in the December cold. The figure of a man was projected on the window. He was of medium height, with curly brown hair and cold brown eyes. He looked to be in his 30s. This? Am I not divining Jason Beria's location? Who is this? He feels a little familiar. Klein was puzzled, but didn't think further about it. He let his spirituality remain in a dispersed state, as if he were roaming some mysterious world. Just as he raised the question, the man turned and walked to a corner of the room, where there were 2 large leather suitcases. The man squatted down and opened one of the suitcases. Inside was a neat stack of bills, with gold bars placed on top of them. The notes that were exposed were all in 10-pound denominations, while the gold bars shone with an enchanting luster. The man pulled something out of a hidden pocket of his suitcase, shook it, and opened it. It was a slightly pale piece of human skin. A complete piece of human skin. The man quickly stripped off his clothes and put on the human skin. In just 10 seconds, he had become Jason Beria with tall cheekbones, blue eyes with a tint of gray, and neatly combed hair. At this point, the scene suddenly shattered, and Klein opened his eyes. It's no wonder that Jason was willing to take a risk. So it turns out that in the past 10 years, he has always been wearing a human skin and has never shown his true face. As expected of a calm and crazy devil. Klein couldn't help but sigh. Jason had left his portrait in the house, and it didn't garner any suspicion from Isengard and the others, because his neighbors had seen him and knew what he looked like. Even without the portrait, with the powers of the Beyonders of the official organizations, it would have been easy to reconstruct his likeness, and the result would have been even better than a photograph. Therefore, there was no reason for Jason not to have the drive to destroy something like it. This was something very logical. Who would have thought that he would have left a hoax in somewhere that looked to be most natural? If searches are made according to the portrait, even if the Nighthawks have sealed artifact 1 to 42, it wouldn't be that easy to lock onto the target. Moreover, in both times, he had used his own abilities to conceal his face. Who would have thought that his face, which had been tightly covered and concealed, was actually fake? Klein realized how cunning Jason was. He rubbed his temples and began to recall the scenes he saw in the dream divination. A house with a glass greenhouse. That's a pretty obvious feature. There aren't many similar buildings in Backland. But the question is, how do I report it? The moment I tell the machinery hive mind, Jason would definitely sense the danger and start to disguise himself and move away. Directly find the Nighthawk with sealed artifact 1 to 42? What if I encounter someone familiar? I don't want to turn into ashes and be scattered into the Tussock River. Besides, I can't rush to report it. I just started gathering information, so how is it possible to receive any information from my various channels so quickly? That fellow is really carrying a large sum of cash and jewelry, a whole suitcase worth of bills. The total value may exceed 50,000 pounds. Thoughts raced through Klein's mind and it took him a moment to calm down. He decided to wait another 2 days, then use the appropriate means to inform the Nighthawks in charge of this matter with the revelation he received. With the divination coming to an end, he returned to the real world, removed his double, and sat on the toilet himself. In the afternoon, Klein threw a coin when he was about to leave. The revelation he received was that it wasn't beneficial for him to head out. There will be danger if I head out? Klein didn't hesitate to return to his living room and sit down. After about 20 minutes, he heard the doorbell ring and saw that it was Isengard Stanton who had come to visit him. "Mr. Stanton, any progress?" Klein asked rather delightfully. Isengard pointed to the back of the hall. "Let's talk inside." "All right." Klein made way by stepping aside. After sitting on two sofas which faced each other, Isengard held his hunter's hat and took a deep breath. "The Desire Apostle has appeared again." Seeing Klein maintaining his silence, he nodded in satisfaction and continued, "The families of two detectives refused protection, believing that they wouldn't be implicated, so they remained outside. Today, at lunchtime, they were found dead in their respective offices. One was so horrified that he died from fright. The other was too excited that he expanded the last of his energy. They were too stubborn, as expected of believers of the tyrant, but as a result, the mandated punishers have formally involved themselves. It's said that the few churches and the military's high-sequence beyonders have cast their gaze over, and they've placed the matter of the Desire Apostle as one of the most important events in recent times. Are you hoping that I wouldn't reveal your identity as a believer of the God of knowledge and wisdom?" Klein asked, seemingly enlightened. "It's easy to talk between detectives." Isengard smiled and nodded. "No problem." Klein made the promise first, then said, "I have some information channels that are convenient to expose. If I get valuable information from them later, I hope you can help me inform the Nighthawks and keep it confidential." As for why it's the Nighthawks instead of the machinery hive mind, he believed that he didn't need to be too clear about it. With the intelligence of a great detective like Stanton, he could easily figure it out. Isengard first agreed to Klein's request, then said in puzzlement, "By telling me, it's the same as letting Jason notice it ahead of time. Let's hope we can think of ways of avoiding that. Also, please help me think about other possibilities." "That ring of yours should be able to mimic several Beyonder powers," Klein calmly replied. "All right." Isengard didn't say anything further. He pondered for a few seconds and took out his pipe to take a whiff. "The Desire Apostle's actions today have verified one of my guesses." "Heh, it's also the question you thought of previously. His main purpose isn't revenge?" Klein understood what Isengard was implying. Isengard leaned forward and solemnly said, "Since Jason has already been through the cold-blooded stage, it means that he's definitely cold-blooded. It's impossible that he would go this far for that devil. Sherlock, look. Up until now, all of the official Beyonders in Backland have been mobilized, and even the high-sequence Beyonders have shifted their attention to this matter. At this point, if Jason wants to deal with someone else, the true target, wouldn't it be much easier?" Klein thought over it for a moment and replied heavily, "That makes sense." After a short exchange, Isengard went on to find Kaslana. After Klein tossed the coin, he went out as planned, heading for the Quelag Club. Neither of them had yet revealed their suspicions to the official Beyonders, fearing that it would end up directing harm at Jason, making him detect it and abandon his series of actions. As soon as he entered the Quelag Club, Klein met the surgeon, Aaron, in the lobby. "Long time no see," he smiled and greeted him. "I've been really busy recently," Aaron replied in a friendly manner, but he maintained his cold expression out of habit. "Besides, my wife recently got pregnant, and I'm going to be a father again." "Congratulations." "When did this happen?" Klein asked casually. Aaron thought for a while and said, "It was just confirmed. She should be pregnant for more than a month." "More than a month?" Klein was startled, and then he looked into his eyes. "Yes, a month or so ago." Aaron nudged his gold-rimmed glasses and gave him a positive answer. "A month or so ago? Isn't that when you were being troubled by Wuxia-related nightmares?" Klein was surprised and puzzled, but he didn't let his emotions show. In the blink of an eye, he thought of the two divinations he had made. Wuxia was in a dark room with the sound of running water outside. Was that symbolizing amniotic fluid or blood? Klein's heart chilled as he suddenly understood something. When he looked at Dr. Aaron again, he wore a rather complicated look in his eyes. He suspected that his wife was carrying Wuxia, a snake of Mercury. In the symbolism of mysticism, the snake of fate's head and tail are connected, with it devouring its own tail. It implies the cycle of destiny in a hidden manner. In order to avoid his enemy, Wuxia took the initiative to secretly initiate a new cycle in advance. Klein guessed based on what he knew. Dr. Aaron didn't notice the abnormality he was trying hard to hide. He smiled and said, "He'll definitely be a cute guy. When he's born, I'll hold a party to celebrate his arrival." "Sherlock, don't refuse my invitation when the time comes." "Perhaps it's a she," Klein replied with a smile. Frankly speaking, he was curious to see what kind of state the newly born snake of Mercury was in. However, he was also a little afraid and worried. After all, the snake of Mercury was a sequence one of the monster pathway related to fate, and it also involved the fight for the position of being a deity. No one could be sure whether the future would be smooth sailing, with peace and bliss. For Dr. Aaron, I don't know if it was fortune or misfortune. Whether Wuxia is kind is one matter, but whether or not the other snake of Mercury would discover him is another matter. And Wuxia hasn't done anything as of now. Informing the Nighthawks now would seem a little cruel. I've always understood wild beyonders. It's best to just quietly watch from the sidelines and not get involved, or perhaps taking advantage of the situation is the best choice. Maybe I made a mistake in my interpretation and am overthinking things? Perhaps Wuxia isn't a snake of Mercury at all. Perhaps the child Mrs. Aaron is carrying is very normal. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. She? That's even better. Aaron said in anticipation. After some thought, Klein asked another question, "Have you had any nightmares lately?" "Occasionally, but they were all normal nightmares. There are no longer any nightmares of Wuxia anymore." "Sherlock, thank you for your guidance," Aaron said earnestly. No, that makes it abnormal. As a keyboard warrior, my limited general knowledge of psychology tells me that occasionally dreaming of Wuxia would be the natural thing to do. It's a standard response from overstimulation. Since Will had caused you so much trouble and left such a deep impression on you, it would definitely be reflected in your dreams. Therefore, the correct outcome would be to occasionally dream about Wuxia, but the dream wouldn't be too clear, to the point of only knowing that something like that had happened without remembering the details. Klein was pretty sure. At that moment, he heard a rustling sound. He subconsciously looked outside the hall, only to see the darkness in the air being dispersed by a strong wind, and the thin light yellow fog was swept away as a result. The leafless branches swayed back and forth, and the strong gust of wind left a clear trail towards the southeast. A few seconds later, everything returned to normal. It's hard to see such strong winds in Backland during winter. At least, I don't remember anything like it before. Aaron sighed as he looked out the window. That's not an ordinary wind. What happened? Klein suppressed his curiosity and made an excuse to go to the bathroom to perform a simple divination, but he failed to obtain any effective revelations. He temporarily put this matter to the back of his mind and prepared to head to the underground shooting range to practice his shooting. At that moment, a waiter wearing a red vest came through the warm hall and respectfully said, "Mr. Moriarty, your friend is here for you." "Who?" Klein asked in surprise. "Mr. Cancer Bernard," the red-vested attendant answered. "The deacon who's often forced to perm his hair. Why is he suddenly looking for me? Have there been any new discoveries?" Klein immediately walked to the reception hall of the club. A Cancer pressed down the hat which had been pushed up by his fluffy hair, walked over, and said with a lowered voice, "The mandated punishers have found Jason Patrick Beria." "How was he found?" Klein asked, half surprised, half curious. According to his divination, Jason Beria had always been wearing human skin. His true appearance and aura weren't what they had assumed they were. It was almost impossible for him to be found so easily. A Cancer surveyed the area and said, "I'm not sure. I just received the news." He pointed to a small white bird standing on the tree outside the door. The bird was leisurely cleaning its feathers with its beak. Before Klein could ask further, Xianxia gave a general account of what had happened. The mandated punishers found clues and confirmed Jason's location. However, the devil discovered the danger in advance and managed to kill 2 mandated punishers and fled before they managed to close in on him. This infuriated the higher-ups of the Church of the Lord of Storms. As such, Spellsinger of God, Ace Snake, is currently personally in pursuit. You likely saw a gust of wind just now. It was caused by him. He's the Archbishop of the Church of the Lord of Storms Backland Diocese, and he's also one of the cardinals of the Church of the Lord of Storms. It sounds normal, but it also feels weird. According to my theory with Mr. Isengard, this can be also understood as a way for Jason, the Desire Apostle, to draw away high-sequence Beyonders. Klein asked after some deliberation, "Are you sure that the person discovered is Jason Beria?" Xianxia's expression instantly turned heavy as he replied with an odd tone, "I'll give it a try," he replied in a strange tone. He motioned to Klein to follow him out and into a large carriage parked at the side of the street. There were 2 members of the machinery hivemind inside. Xianxia took a deep breath and took out the strange patterned silver mirror from a special pocket in his clothes. After doing the necessary steps, he gloomily said, "Honorable Arodes, my question is, where is Jason Patrick Beria's current location?" The surrounding light suddenly warped, as if they were lights after a rain. A scene rapidly surfaced on the silver mirror. It was a riverboat with a sail raised. Jason Beria, with his high cheekbones, blue eyes with a gray tint, and neatly combed hair, pressed down his cap, propped up the collar of his coat, and hurried into the cabin. He's really trying to escape Backland. Spellsinger of God seems to be heading towards the dock area, a female machinery hivemind member said in realization. That's way too easy for him to be exposed, right? Klein was filled with doubt. Xianxia wasn't concerned with any of this, all his attention was placed on the silver mirror surface. This time, there was only the choice of answering. Answering it wrongly or lying meant suffering a terrifying penalty. Soon, words in blood red appeared on the mirror. If the man you like is covered with lumps, has his skin shed, reducing him only to flesh and blood, or has become a monster, but it is still able to communicate with him, will you still like him? What a shameful question. Wait, a man? Klein almost turned his head to look at Xianxia. Xianxia slowly breathed out and said, "I will, but I will kill him with my own hands." Very honest. A new combination of words appeared on the surface of the silver mirror. This question and answer game is simply a public hearing. Klein really wanted to cover his face. He looked at the other 2 machinery hivemind members and saw no abnormalities from them, or perhaps, it should be said that they were pretending to not have any abnormal expressions. He hesitantly said, "I keep feeling that all of this has been too easy. Perhaps that's not the real Jason Beria?" But Jason Beria was directed at him. Xianxia was planning to put away the silver mirror. Klein thought for a few seconds and said after organizing his words, "No, what I truly mean is that we have to abandon any ingrained judgments. What we are looking for is that Desire Apostle, not Jason Beria. The 2 might not necessarily be the same. This is a point that I have to mention as a detective." On King's Avenue, a luxurious carriage left the kingdom's parliament. The carpeted carriage was furnished with a bed, a sofa, a table, and other furniture, like a mobile room. Duke Pallasnegan, who was dressed in a dark blue admiral's uniform, was drinking a polished crystal glass of red wine that resembled crimson blood. As he sampled the wine, he said thoughtfully, "Invite Earl Hall to be my guest tomorrow. I would like to discuss with him about increasing the remuneration of the factory workers and improving their working hours, as well as amending the poor law. These are bills he has been pushing hard for recently. He should be very interested." Why would the Church of the Evernight Goddess suddenly be concerned over such matters? When sending the invitation, you can first inform Earl Hall about the topics I wish to discuss. The property restrictions for the elections are necessary and cannot be lowered. Otherwise, those who are in control of a large number of workers will take up more seats. Also, suppress the recent attack on the invalid voting districts. The secretary at the side quickly scribbled down Duke Negan's orders. After he was done, Duke Negan sighed and said, "The reason I'm doing this is also for the sake of the nobles. However, there are more and more useless fellows among us, and there's even quite a number of them who owe money to the tycoons." At that moment, the carriage didn't turn towards Empress Borough but went straight ahead. As the greatest property-owning noble apart from the king, Duke Negan had many mistresses, but in the relatively conservative Lone Kingdom, this was something which would leave him vulnerable to his political enemies. Therefore, even as a noble duke, he still had to sneak around when he went to his mistress's place, but this seemed to only give him more pleasure. Today, he was planning to go to his most beloved mistress of the past 2 to 3 years, a young girl who had just turned 20. Duke Negan took out a bottle of medicine made of mummy powder and drank it. He couldn't help but touch the accessory hanging from his neck. It was a dark blue thumb-sized conch. It was a mystical item that the Church of the Lord of Storms had specially provided after his last assassination attempt by Kalangos. As long as Duke Negan blew on it, the Holy Wind Cathedral's spellsinger of God, Ace Snake, would hear it and lock onto his position. In order to protect himself, Duke Negan even moved the residences of his mistresses to areas near the Holy Wind Cathedral. The carriage slowly moved until it reached an extremely luxurious building. At a glance, there was a glass greenhouse filled with bright red roses. Inside the carriage outside the Quelag Club. The Desire Apostle might not necessarily be Jason Beria? You believe that we might have been misled? A Cancer didn't scoff, show contempt, or think lightly of what Klein had said. Instead, he began to seriously discuss the problem with him. Not a bad deacon. However, it could also be due to him frequently using the magic mirror name Erodes. No matter how bad his temper is, it would eventually be worn out. Klein praised silently and nodded sincerely. This is my personal opinion, derived from a cautious standpoint. It's very easy to prove it again. Ask the magic mirror of the Desire Apostle's location, and not of Jason Beria's location. A Cancer pressed down his hat and said, "Makes sense." His expression turned serious once again, and his gaze landed on the magic mirror in his palm. "Deacon A Cancer, if you were to ask for any clues here, the devil will definitely be able to detect it," Klein reminded them. "That's right." A Cancer turned his head to the other 2 members and said, "Continue protecting Mr. Moriarty in secret. Even if the Desire Apostle attacks, the 3 of you should be able to last for some time. Besides, there's military personnel nearby." "Yes, Deacon," the 2 Machinery Hive Mind members answered without hesitation. "Box Nouvelle Coem." A Cancer left at once, heading for where the Nighthawks were, which was around Isengard Stanton. With the Spellsinger of God stirred, and the sealed artifact of the Church of Goddess Church out in force, if the Desire Apostle were to really do anything, it would definitely be this afternoon. Let's hope that there's enough time and that the magic mirror will give him the correct answer. But this way, I won't have a chance to get involved, and I won't be able to personally see the devil that has harmed all of us die, and I won't have access to his suitcase full of money, gold bars, gold coins, and jewelry. Klein looked at the Cancers departing back and sighed in disappointment. However, his mood soon recovered. "That's good too. At the very least I won't have to take any risks and be able to safely get out of this predicament. Furthermore, the Machinery Hive Mind definitely won't treat me unfairly. If I were to succeed, my opinions and suggestions definitely would have played an important role. Furthermore, I'm a believer of the god of steam and machinery, so it's likely I'll receive some of the spoils. Considering the premise of £50,000, it shouldn't be too small." Klein couldn't help but feel a bit regretful as he thought of this. But he wouldn't risk himself by getting involved. A magician never performs unprepared. It happened too quickly and hastily, without giving me any time to plan at all. Klein nodded at the 2 Machinery Hive Mind members, got out of the carriage, and returned to the Quelag Club, where he had no trouble getting the attendant to allocate him a break room. Hillston Borough. In Isengard Stanton's living room. Leonard Mitchell combed some of his slightly unruly black hair. In accordance with Captain Soest's instructions and the help of the other Nighthawks, he barely managed to put on the silver armor, which was stained with large amounts of blood. He pulled down his visor and hid his green eyes in the darkness. Then he extended his left hand, which was covered by a silver metal gauntlet, and held the magic mirror Xianxia handed him. Within the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, the code name of the silver mirror was 2-111. It's only a grade 2 sealed artifact? Soest asked, slightly surprised. Xianxia nodded. Yes, it's not that dangerous. As he said that, he suddenly sounded like he was gritting his teeth. That is to say that its other aspects have reached the standards of a grade 1 sealed artifact? Soest asked in thought. Xianxia warily glanced at him. Only in certain aspects. He refused to divulge any more information. At this moment, Leonard used his right hand to gently stroke the surface of the silver mirror. The living room suddenly became quiet. After repeating it 3 times, he said in a deep voice, Honorable Aurora, my question is, where is the current location of the Desire Apostle who assaulted Isengard Stanton? The entire house turned dark as though a dark cloud had passed by. The surface of the silver mirror glowed with an aqueous light, and a blurry image quickly formed. It was a luxurious villa with a large garden in front of the window. In the center of the garden, there was a glass greenhouse, with bright red roses blooming inside. Above the glass greenhouse, the pale sun could still be seen behind the thin fog. It's in Backland. Isengard Stanton immediately derived the location of the scene based on the angle of the view and the position of the sun in the sky. This is completely different from the answer when we asked about Jason Beria. We've been tricked. Xianxia said in a deep voice. Solasure Soest exhaled and said, how crafty. Then, who's the Jason Beria that Spellsinger of God is chasing? Sigh, there's no time for discussion. We need to narrow down the general location of the presented scene. Then, we'll immediately take action. I suspect that the Desire Apostle is planning to cause a huge incident. At this point, the silver mirror known as Aurora had dissipated the scene, replacing it with words. It required Leonard Mitchell to answer a question, and if he lied or refused to answer, he would be severely punished. For some baffling reason, Leonard felt a little nervous. He put away his usual frivolous attitude and quietly waited for the question. A few seconds later, he saw the blood-red words change, taking shape one by one. On your body, is there something attached? Halfway through the question, Leonard's pupils rapidly contracted. His back tensed up, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. If it wasn't for him being concealed by the blood-stained silver armor, the others would have already noticed his abnormality. Right at this moment, his left palm inexplicably trembled. The silver magic mirror suddenly trembled, and the scarlet words were strangely tainted with a tint of green. If one didn't keep staring at the mirror with rapt attention, it would be difficult for others to discover that the color of the mirror had slightly changed. The words continued warping, changing the question to, on your body, is there a scar which you cannot tell others? Yes, that scar resides in my memory, Leonard answered stably, but his body inside the blood-stained silver armor felt a sense of exhaustion from suddenly relaxing a high tension. This mirror is too dangerous. It actually noticed it. Thankfully, old man has recovered a bit after such a long time, he thought, his lips were dry. Soest took out his pocket watch, pressed it open to take a look, and said to Leonard, who was inside the blood-stained silver armor. There's still time, you'll be in charge of the rest of the operation. Yes, Captain Soest. Leonard let out a secret sigh. Dock area, Backland shipyard. Patrick Jason Beria entered a cabin he had reserved in advance. He looked out of the window and observed the sky filled with fog as he silently counted the time. After a while, he quickly took off his hat and clothes. Then, with a tug of his hand, he pulled off the outer layer of human skin. Under the human skin was a beautiful woman in her early 30s with a profound look in her eyes. She wasn't the man with brown hair and brown eyes whom Klein had seen during the dream divination. The woman took out some clothes and put them on methodically, quickly becoming an absolutely charming woman. Finally, she pulled out a fist-sized stone figurine from the bottom of a suitcase and wrapped it tightly with the peeled-off skin before tying a dead knot. Having done all this, the riverboat was already some distance away. She opened the window and threw Patrick Jason's skin along with the stone figurine into the river. Plop! The human skin that was tied to the heavy object quickly sank. The woman clapped her hands and closed the window. Carrying the suitcase, she changed to a different cabin she had prepared. Then, she sat down at the window of the new cabin, propped up her elbows, her face in her hands, and looked out leisurely. After an unknown period of time, she saw a strong gust of wind blowing in the air, dispersing the thin fog. The corners of her lips curled up into a brilliant smile. In a luxurious villa not far from the Holy Wind Cathedral in Sherwood Borough, the bloated, blue-eyed Palace Negan bear hugged his approaching mistress, a beautiful young girl with a bit of innocence on her face. There were two people following him. One of them was a middle-aged man wearing a black tailcoat. He had brown hair and blue eyes, but he didn't wear an expression. He was a Beyonder guard provided by the Church of the Lord of Storms, a Sequence 6 windblast. The other person was Duke Negan's secretary. He was a thin blonde young man with delicate features, looking refined and reserved. His biggest flaw was his receding hairline, which didn't match his age. As for the other guards, or security personnel, they were spread out outside the house. On the second floor, the windblast entered the bedroom before Duke Negan for a quick inspection. Meanwhile, Duke Negan's secretary was in charge of searching the surrounding rooms. After confirming that there were no problems, they nodded at Duke Negan, indicating that he could continue. "My roused-up feelings have almost calmed down," Duke Negan said half-jokingly. His mistress happily responded, "Then we can have a nice chat. I'd like to hear about your time at sea. I hope you'll eventually have the energy to do so." Duke Negan carried his mistress into the bedroom and closed the door behind him with his heel. His secretary and the windblast entered the rooms on either side of him, not relaxing in the slightest. In the attic of this house, a man in a dark overcoat sat on an old chair, his eyes half closed. It was unknown what he was trying to sense, but he would occasionally smile and shake his head. His brown hair was slightly curled, and his brown eyes were cold. It was the same person that Klein had seen in the dream divination. The difference was that there was one fewer suitcase by his feet. How vigorous, and what intense desire. This doesn't match my judgment of him. It looks like he took some medicine. That just works so well for me. Heh, how could they possibly imagine that Patrick Jason Beria is actually two people? The man tilted his face up slightly as if he was intoxicated. It's almost time. Right now. His right hand suddenly clenched, as if he was tightly clutching someone's heart. Beyond the window, the glass greenhouse reflected the pale light of the sun, and the bright roses stood out even in the thin fog. In the bedroom, Duke Negan seemed to have recovered the feeling of following his father and elders around the vast lands when he was young, riding a horse, using a hound, and chasing a wild beast. Finally, he climaxed and the surroundings seemed to become abnormally quiet. At this moment, his mind suddenly buzzed once. He felt as if the pleasure and comfort he was feeling had suddenly exploded one after another. It continued exploding without end or limit, again and again. Duke Negan's waist kept shaking, and his eyes were blank, his brain having lost its train of thought. His heart began to beat violently in an unbearable manner, like a steam boiler whose pressure had gone beyond its limits. It could blow up at any time, and hot steam could gush out at any moment. If it were an ordinary person or a Beyonder who wasn't physically strong, they would have suffered a heart attack, a massive cerebral hemorrhage, and die on the spot. But Duke Negan ultimately managed to ride through the attack. Only his eyes were unfocused, and saliva was flowing out the corner of his mouth before he weakly slumped onto his mistress. The windblast and the Duke's secretary, who were on guard on both sides of the room, simultaneously sensed the strange and mysterious smell of spirituality. The former's body was suddenly surrounded by a violent wind, sweeping him towards the wall, and with a clang, a large hole was blown through the wall as he stepped into the bedroom. The secretary went straight to the source of the mystery, the attic of the house. Along the way, he didn't evade or dodge, but the decorative vases and other objects in the corridor seemed to have found lives of their own and avoided him in ingenious ways. As he ran up the stairs to the attic, the wooden floorboards seemed to rise, as if to give him a hand. In just 3 or 4 seconds, the refined, handsome, blonde young man entered the attic and saw a figure sitting on an old chair. The figure was covered in a thick black liquid, just like the gathering of all the ugly desires and intense feelings in the depths of a human's heart. It was the greed of willing to sell and hang oneself by the ropes, the hunger that wouldn't even spare one's own kind, and a lust without limits. This was a devil walking the earth. The skinny secretary's expression didn't change, nor did he attack directly. Instead, he looked at the other party, reached behind him, and politely closed the door. Bam! The wooden door of the attic was closed. The entire room suddenly felt like it had been completely sealed, as if one could never leave the room unless effort was put in to crack the seal. At this moment, the concept of closing the door and sealing the room seemed to have been changed to seal this place, isolate the outside from the inside. The Desire Apostle moved. His body expanded and grew a pair of huge bat wings that emitted light blue tongues of flames. One by one, fireballs that exuded a strong sulfurous smell were formed, and they bombarded Duke Negan's blonde secretary. The secretary reached out with his white-gloved left hand and clenched it while half-turning his wrist. Boom! 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 The fireballs stopped following the principle of straight or parabolic paths as they scattered in every direction in a sudden outburst of chaos, like the irregular movement of tiny particles suggested by a botanist one. Some of them hit the wall, some hit the ceiling, some fell beside the weak-looking secretary, and some fell backward, almost wounding the Desire Apostle himself. The entire attic was a mess, with traces of destruction and char everywhere, and the house even shook a few times. However, the mysterious power that was sealed in here, or the rules that had been tampered with, had yet been destroyed. The surrounding walls, the old wooden door, and the dusty roof appeared to be on the verge of collapsing, but it remained intact. The Desire Apostle wasn't frustrated by the failure of his previous attempt, nor was he flustered that he couldn't control his enemy or catalyze him into a frenzy, due to his calmness and restrained desires. His coffee-brown eyes suddenly lit up like lava as he took the form of the blonde secretary. He spat out a word in the devil language, one filled with foulness and filth, die. Almost at the same time, the pupils under the secretary's golden-rimmed glasses constricted. He opened his left fist and aimed at the Desire Apostle with the palm of his hand. Suddenly, his figure split into 2. One was refined and skinny like his actual self. The other was a shadow covered by a black liquid of desire. The two quickly alternated, overlapping with each other at times. Die. The words said in the language of foulness echoed in the attic as the secretary let out a low grunt and took 2 steps back. Following that, the split silhouette dissipated, and large swaths of rusted red marks appeared on his face, as though he had turned into a man of iron that had been left in a humid area for years. Cough. 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 He coughed violently, spitting out blobs of rusted blood that had congealed into clumps. The marks on his body began to slowly peel off. Cough. 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 The Desire Apostle was also coughing out blood that had clumped and turned to rust. The viscous black liquid covering his entire body suddenly became much thinner. The language of foulness seemed to have half of its effects transferred to him by Duke Negan's secretary. In the bedroom, the Windblessed helped Duke Negan up and kicked the beautiful mistress to the other side in case she was an accomplice of the assailant. The reason why he didn't help the secretary was because he knew he had only one responsibility, to protect Duke Negan. And in similar situations, one had to be wary of more than one enemy. At this point, Duke Negan had somewhat recovered a little. He was rather strong, but his limbs still felt weak. His body felt empty and his mind was sluggish. He was completely unable to use his Beyonder powers. He motioned to the Windblessed to remove the conch necklace from his neck and brought the item to his lips. Duke Negan took a deep breath and blew into the small conch which was covered in strange patterns. Splash! The low and deep sound of the tide was heard as it rushed towards the Holy Wind Cathedral. With his grace's speed, he should be able to arrive very soon. The Windblessed first reassured him, and then with Duke Negan on his back, he went to the window and leaped down. He wanted to meet up with the Duke's guards outside. There were 2 or 3 low-sequence Beyonders among them. Duke Negan gasped for breath and said, "Catch him, make sure to catch him alive, or with a spirit body. I want to know who it is." He had suffered an assassination attempt from Pirate Admiral Kalangos the last time, and now, it was an unknown Sequence 5 expert. Duke Negan was very aware that he hadn't developed any irredeemable grudges with anyone recently. As such, he was especially angry and resentful. He wanted to find the mastermind and use all the resources at his disposal to tear the mastermind apart. The premise of all this was that he could find clues from the assassin. 7 or 8 seconds later, most of the Duke's guards surged forward, surrounding Palace Negan and the Windblessed in the middle as they gathered in front of the garden. "Wait here and be on guard against the enemy," the Windblessed gave the order. Under normal circumstances, he had to protect the Duke and evacuate from the assassination grounds as quickly as possible and rush to the safety of the Holy Wind Cathedral. However, he wasn't sure if there were any other enemies, and he was afraid of being ambushed en route. He was afraid of missing the reinforcements from Spellsinger of God, Ace Snake, and ending up being placed in a more perilous situation. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Time kept flowing by as the house shook from time to time, and the battle inside seemed to have reached its climax. "Why is the Archbishop not here yet?" the panting Duke Negan asked in a slightly panicked voice. With the Archbishop's flying speed, he should have arrived very quickly. However, there weren't any signs of the thin fog being scattered in the direction of the Holy Wind Cathedral. On high alert, the Windblessed hesitantly said, perhaps the Archbishop, the Archbishop." He eventually failed to mention the possibility that the Archbishop wasn't in the Holy Wind Cathedral. At that moment, the beautiful mistress of Duke Negan came to the window of the bedroom on the 2nd floor, her eyes filled with a lost and beautiful smile. Then, she jumped down, deliberately hitting her head on the concrete floor. Bam! After producing a jarring sound, there were quite a few cracks on her beautiful head, and blood began to flow out. She rolled a few times, weakly, until she was facing up. Her eyes had lost all focus, and her frozen expression was one of madness and fear. Seeing this scene, many members of the Duke's guards couldn't help but feel horrified. Even Duke Negan himself felt that his emotions were on the verge of collapse when Archbishop Snake didn't arrive. "Let's go. Let's get out of here," he weakly called out on instinct. Just as the Windblessed was rejoicing over not being soft-hearted when kicking the mistress away, otherwise, the Duke would have been killed on the spot, he heard a command filled with horror. His heart suddenly skipped a beat. Inside the attic, the Desire Apostle, who was in the middle of a fierce battle, suddenly liquefied and turned into countless black shadows, jumping up and down on the ground. After dodging the blonde secretary's attack, he rematerialized in another direction. Then, he looked at the enemy, raised his right arm, and slightly curled the corners of his mouth. "No." The blonde secretary's eyes reddened. All of a sudden, the Desire Apostle clenched his fist. Outside the luxurious house, Duke Negan's horror erupted. It shot straight to his brain and into his veins, blanketing all his nerves. He heard the sound of something shattering and felt a warm sensation at the back of his head. At the same time, several members of the Duke's guards became flustered and panicked. They all raised their custom revolvers or rifles in their hands and started shooting randomly towards the center. Bang! 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 The Windblessed was the first to reach out and grab Duke Negan. He rolled to the ground, and a formless wind as sharp as knives appeared out of thin air, slicing through the throats of the guards. Splat! Splat! The guards clutched at their throats, slowly falling to the ground in a pool of fresh blood. Duke Negan's body twitched a few times, but then it stopped moving. He was robbed of his life by his own horror. If he hadn't been a Sequence 6 Beyonder, then his horror might have even dismembered him. Of course, if he hadn't become extremely weak, then he wouldn't have possessed such intense emotions. And even if he had these emotions, then he wouldn't have directly died as a result of this. But there were no ifs in this world. Palace Negan, the leader of the Conservative Party, the noble with the largest land apart from the king, the elder brother of the current prime minister, a Sequence 6 Beyonder, and a truly important figure, was dead. The roses in the nearby glass greenhouse were still in full bloom. In the attic, the blonde secretary seemed to sense something and could no longer control his emotions. As a result, his mind went blank, and he anxiously ran outside, automatically opening the door to the sealed room. 2 seconds later, he snapped to his senses and turned around again. However, the figure that was covered by the black liquid and the suitcase in the corner had disappeared. The Desire Apostle quickly left the villa, evacuating from the scene based on a predetermined route. It was at this moment that a thick sea of blood seemed to appear before his eyes. The Desire Apostle, who had once worn Patrick Jason's skin, stopped in his tracks and looked around in bewilderment. Only now did he vaguely realize that danger was approaching. He was at the edge of a garden where the grass had withered due to winter and was revealing dark brown soil. On the right side of the street, there weren't many pedestrians on the weekday afternoon. At this moment, there were only a few people passing by, but they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Suddenly, a silver glint appeared in the eyes of the Desire Apostle, and a person decked out in full body armor emerged from the other side of the garden. The armor was stained with congealed blood, diagonally from its left shoulder all the way down. It exuded a bewitching beauty and appeared to be extremely heavy. Every step it took slightly shook the ground. Upon seeing this blood-stained silver armor, the Desire Apostle felt as if he couldn't breathe properly, as if he had met his most terrifying nemesis. How are they here so quickly? They saw through my ruse so quickly? The Desire Apostle regained his calm and cold-bloodedness, fully focused on sensing the emotions and desires of the Beyonder inside the blood-stained silver armor. However, to his despair, the silver armor completely blocked his Beyonder powers. It was as if he had touched a rock, a piece of cold armor which had no one in it. The Desire Apostle had no choice but to raise his right hand, spreading out his giant bat wings and bringing with it some blue flames that rapidly condensed. At that moment, a silver light flashed from his right palm, and his thumb fell to the ground. The wound was extremely clean. Amidst swooshing sounds and a flash of silver light, the remaining 9 fingers of the Desire Apostle were severed. The suitcase he was carrying also fell to the ground with a thud. The Desire Apostle's pupils immediately contracted to a needle point, and he flapped the pair of huge bat wings on his back to escape in another direction. The shadow under his feet shrank back without anyone realizing it, hiding in one spot. The Desire Apostle had only taken 2 steps when countless silver lights burst out from his body like blooming fireworks. The thick black liquid that covered his body splashed to the ground like raindrops. His forearm, arm, shoulders, ribs, neck, and other parts of his body broke off and smoothly slid downwards. Splat. 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 The pale, blood-stained intestines of the Desire Apostle splashed to the ground, along with his squirming stomach and his beating heart which had yet to cease. The place where he stood was where the blood was the thickest. The further he went, the more splat it looked, which when put together, they formed a beautiful flower of death. A Sequence 5 expert, a Desire Apostle who had just completed an impossible assassination, was dismembered without any resistance. This was a Grade 1 sealed artifact. This was the sealed artifact that had caused over 100,000 people to lose their lives, sealed artifact 1-42. Dressed in that terrifying-looking armor, Leonard Mitchell struggled to take 2 steps forward, sized up the dismembered body on the ground, and raised his voice. He's not completely dead yet. He paused for a moment and then added, different devils have different characteristics. This Desire Apostle is a shadow shifter. He's just abandoned his own body, only leaving a shadow behind. While Solasure Soest instructed a number of Nighthawks and members of the machinery hive mind to keep ordinary people at bay, he surveyed the scene and listened to Leonard. He took out his pocket watch and opened it. He asked with a serious expression, "There's only 10 minutes left, is it enough?" "Don't force it." "No problem. 1-42 has locked onto him." I can sense its excitement, Leonard said without hesitation. Soest spread his red-gloved fingers and said to the other Nighthawks, "Bring hot water with you and follow Leonard closely. Once there are any problem, switch with him immediately and dig a bathtub on the spot. Also, leave marks. The other team members and I will quickly catch up." Tap. 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 The blood-stained silver armor began running in pursuit. Despite looking heavy, it was incredulously fast. Soest watched as the few red gloves left before turning to look at a cancer. "Deacon Bernard, take the rest of the machinery hivemind members to that house. Watch the Duke's guards and anyone else that's alive at the scene. Watch." A cancer subconsciously returned with a question. Soest nodded seriously and said, "How can the Desire Apostle be able to determine that the Duke would be coming to this house today, to the point of precisely pinpointing the time, and then perfectly luring the Spellsinger of God away?" A cancer was instantly enlightened. "Are you saying that a member of the Duke's guards or someone trusted by him is a partner of the Desire Apostle? Otherwise, there was no way that his timing could be that perfect. The so-called operation wouldn't have any chance of success otherwise. It can only be said that this is the most probable cause. We cannot eliminate the assumption that the Desire Apostle has a powerful clairvoyant." Soest didn't continue as he led a second batch of Nighthawks and followed the marks to reinforce the teammates up ahead. With a calm face, he led the rest of the machinery hivemind back to the house of the Duke's mistress. He looked up at the pale sun behind the thin fog and knew that the situation in the whole of Backland, and even the whole of the Lone Kingdom, or even the world would change because of what had happened today. In the darkness of the sewers, a shadow was advancing rapidly in a particular direction while clinging to the bottom of the stone wall. He wanted to take advantage of the fact that the blood-stained armor was tall and heavy, making it inconvenient for him to move around in certain narrow areas of the sewers, thus, allowing him to shake him off his tail. Every time the shadow moved a certain distance forward, it would stop, frozen in place. His pitch-black surface continued to swell and solidify as if it was trying to produce new flesh and blood, but due to a lack of materials, it failed miserably. The Desire Apostle let out a painful gasp, feeling that he could lose control at any moment in this state. After a short breather, he continued to run for his life, unable to afford the time to decrease the threat of the problem he faced. He was also afraid that the terrifying blood-stained silver armor would silently catch up with him. At the Quelag Club, Klein entered the lounge and took the newspapers to the toilet. He was afraid that the Desire Apostle would flee in advance, leaving potential danger for himself, Isengard Stanton, Kaslana, and the innocent private detectives. Therefore, he planned on heading above the grey fog to perform another divination to confirm the Desire Apostle's present situation and, thus, adopt a targeted strategy. After repeating the previous process of replacing himself with a paper figurine, he sat in the seat of the fool, conjuring Jason Beria's handkerchief and trying to divine his current location. In the dusky dream world, Klein saw the dark sewers. He saw a living shadow and how his body seemingly appeared to fill itself with flesh and blood, only to constantly fail, as well as tiny black dust that kept being shed from his body. The scene climbed higher and arrived above ground, revealing a towering cathedral. Holy Wind Cathedral. Klein opened his closed eyes and understood the situation of the Desire Apostle. He hasn't been caught yet, but he seems to be heavily injured. His condition is in terrible shape and it's filled with abnormalities. His suitcase is gone too. It must have been dropped when he was injured. Klein thought for a moment. Using divination, he recalled the map of Backland and made it appear before his eyes. Similarly, he came up with a rough layout of Backland's sewers. Having previously made full use of the sewer system, he had always been gathering similar information such as this. The main focus was on East Borough, the Backland Bridge area, and the area where he was located in, Sherwood Backland. After some hard work, he had long completed the first stage of his plan of understanding the main layout of the sewer network. To have a more in-depth understanding of it would require an extremely long period of persistence. When the time came, Klein even thought of infiltrating Backland's municipal hall and directly sneak a peek at the design prints. According to the two maps and the scene seen in the dream divination, Klein noticed that the Desire Apostle, Beria, hadn't fled in the direction of the Tussock River. Instead, he had taken the opposite route to Hillston Burrow, as if he wanted to pass through and enter the artificial lake in Empress Burrow. In other words, he's getting closer and closer to me. Klein's mind stirred as he suddenly had an idea. Although I'm not sure which sewer he'll pass through, I can make a judgment via divination. He's heavily injured and in a very strange state. His interference in this aspect has turned extremely weak. At close distances, it's not like I can't find him. After all, I've seen what he really looks like, and I have a grasp of his aura. When it comes to finding people, I'm a professional. I have to do something. I can't let him escape just like that. There's still time. After confirming the degree of danger, Klein made up his mind and returned to the real world. He took out the candle, quickly set up a ritual, summoned himself, and responded to himself. Not long after, there was a figure in black armor, wearing a black crown, and a cloak of the same color in the bathroom. It was Klein in his spirit body state while carrying the Dark Emperor card. He also included mystical items such as the sun brooch and biological poison bottle, so as to ensure success. Then, he disappeared into the air and left the Quelag Club in another direction. The current Klein could fly, so he was very fast, but he couldn't cause any wind, because he was a spirit body. He scraped past a tree and took away a dead branch. Having seen Jason Beria's actual appearance before, together with his own memory and the handkerchief as a medium, Klein, combined with the layout map and the dowsing rod divination, quickly determined the sewer areas that Jason had passed. After entering the pitch-black and fetid area, Klein used his maximum speed to pass through a large number of narrow areas and entered a relatively spacious area. The dark river flowed, and a mixed smell filled the air. He would occasionally change his direction and chase after Jason Beria. The Desire Apostle nearly lost control again. He stopped and pressed himself against the damp walls and cold pipes, trying hard to rein in his bloodlust and his desire to kill. Pant. Pant. The thin shadow started to move. At this moment, he suddenly turned his head to look at the spot he had just passed. The pitch-black armor and the black crown first entered his eyes, outlining an extremely imposing figure. Behind the figure, the weightless cloak lightly swayed as he moved forward. It's nearby. A body of heavy silver armor stained in blood went through the entrance and climbed down to the sewers. For 27 the choice of the times plus, turn off reset. The murky river in the sewers flowed beneath the unlit surroundings. If a normal person walked in here, then he would have to carry a lantern in order to see the necessary details of the situation clearly. However, to Klein, who was in his spirit body state, this wasn't an obstacle. Everything around him had long been reflected in his eyes. Therefore, when the Desire Apostle discovered him, he also discovered the Desire Apostle. He didn't speak, nor did he hesitate. He opened his mouth and let out a soundless screech. This was an attack that directly damaged the soul. The Desire Apostle suddenly stopped moving, as if someone had delivered a heavy blow to him. Large patches of shadow-like black substances fell off his body, as though he was shaking off the snowflakes that had been tainted with the deepest desires. In that instant, the Desire Apostle, who was already severely injured, almost fainted. Without the support of his physical body, he was like a candlelight in the middle of a raging wind, swaying back and forth, on the verge of being extinguished at any moment. His shadow suddenly dispersed, turning into a pitch-black liquid that flowed in all directions, making it impossible to know which shadow to pursue. At that moment, a shadow suddenly jumped out from the darkness behind Klein, and it suddenly rushed forward. The black liquid, that could no longer be considered sticky, was merely a tool used by the Desire Apostle to confuse and make it easier for him to launch a surprise attack. Klein didn't seem to react at all, allowing the shadow to lunge onto him. However, the Desire Apostle suddenly shivered, as if he had touched the coldest and chilliest object possible. The shadow rapidly slowed down, as if it had been frozen stiff. He knew that wraiths and shadows came with freezing effects, but he didn't expect that the fellow wearing the Dark Emperor's crown would have such an influence on a spirit body like him. This was a case of being completely suppressed when it came to their lives' natural order. Klein had expected such an outcome. He half-turned his body, stretched out his right hand and placed it on the head of the stiff shadow. Then, the dark golden sun brooch, which was concealed by the black armor, flashed with a faint light. The Desire Apostle sensed the danger and could perceive his imminent doom. He tried to resist but was temporarily powerless. A ray of pure and holy light appeared out of nowhere and landed on the shadow's head, enveloping his body. The surroundings were suddenly illuminated as the black shadow struggled with all its might but didn't stop evaporating. In just a blink of an eye, it had become abnormally thin, and its spirituality was filled with the radiance of the blazing sun and cries of indignation. Klein didn't give him a chance to catch his breath, and he summoned another pure and bright holy light. The feeling of daylight lasted for 2 seconds before the Desire Apostle fell to the ground, losing all signs of life. His body remained in his shadow state, thin as though it had no density. This Sequence 5 expert who had just assassinated a duke had died just like that. He didn't even have the time to pass on his last words. At the same time, Klein saw that the deceased spirit was on the verge of dissipating after suffering the blows. The Beyonder characteristic will take a while to appear. Should I mimic Miss Sharon by possessing the shadow and speeding up the process? But I don't know how. Klein began considering what to do next. Suddenly, he felt the ground tremble slightly. Relying on his spiritual intuition, he looked back at the place where he had passed by before. A tall, heavy silver armor was rushing over. Diagonally down from the left shoulder, it was stained with a large amount of solidified blood. Sealed Artifact 1-42. Klein's heart tightened. Without any hesitation, he wrapped the spirit of the Desire Apostle within him and ended the summoning. His original plan was that as long as the official Beyonders arrived, he would return immediately even if he didn't manage to finish off the Desire Apostle, handing over the rest to them. The red glove and the blood-stained silver armor only saw a silhouette wearing a black crown and a similarly colored cloak before it disappeared without a trace. He narrowed his eyes, carefully examining the spot where the man had just been, and found the Desire Apostle who had lost his life. Clearing clues and destroying evidence, he said in a low voice. Tap. 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 The red gloves who were behind him arrived one after the other. After returning above the gray fog, Klein wasn't in a hurry to channel the spirit. Instead, he directly left the mysterious space and returned to his body in the real world. He skillfully packed up the ritual items like the candles, and soon, the last traces were removed. After doing all of this, he once again created a double. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived at the ancient palace above the gray fog. Here he could communicate directly with a remnant spirit, as a real spirit medium could do, without having to pray to anyone or use the help of a ritual. He had confirmed that when he communicated with Nimblewright Master Rosego's spirit. Considering that the spirit of the Desire Apostle had been purified and might dissipate at any moment, Klein prepared himself to ask the relatively more important information. As for the potion formula for the Devil Pathway, he planned to consider it only at the end. In any case, even if he obtained it, he didn't plan on selling it, lest he would nurture a few cold-blooded serial murderers. Looking at the Desire Apostle with brown hair and brown, blank eyes, Klein emanated his spirituality and asked, "What were you plotting?" The Desire Apostle's connection had been completely severed off from the outside world by the gray fog and could only reply in a muddled voice, "Assassinate Duke Negan." Duke Negan? Him again? Who wants him dead so much? Klein was stunned as he asked, "Did it succeed?" "Yes," the Desire Apostle answered calmly without giving any additional descriptions. In this state, he only replied to whatever he was asked. "Poor Duke Negan, the Lord of Storms wasn't able to protect you." Klein gestured the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. He didn't attempt to understand the details and directly asked, "Who instigated you to do so?" Was it the organization that had commissioned Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos? Klein recalled the assassination attempt. The Desire Apostle calmly said, "An organization, the most secret and ancient organization, most Beyonders don't know of its existence. Its members are said to have important figures in various fields, maybe the higher-ups of the various churches and militaries of different nations. Sounds familiar. Could it be that secret organization which Emperor Roselle joined, the ancient organization that wields the second blasphemy slate? Klein's mind stirred as he asked, what kind of reward did they promise you, that you would be willing to give up your identity of more than 10 years? The Desire Apostle replied in a slightly changed voice, a card of blasphemy, the Abyss card. A card of blasphemy? The Abyss card, one of Roselle's 22 cards of blasphemy. This most likely corresponded to the devil pathway. It's no wonder that the Desire Apostle was willing to sacrifice everything that he had accumulated over the past 10 years just for this. In it lies the hope for him to become a high-sequence Beyonder. The reward is much more valuable than the mission. However, it's unlikely that Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos would be attracted by such a reward, unless that organization has another card of blasphemy or some other item. If it's really the mysterious organization which Roselle joined, finding a few cards of blasphemy is quite normal. Even if they don't, they still possess the blasphemy slate. Klein was alarmed at first before asking in confusion, why do they want Duke Negan dead? The spirit of the Desire Apostle thinned significantly again, and he said in a hollow voice, I don't know. All I did was consider taking the mission or not. Then, have you heard anything? Klein pressed. The Desire Apostle remained in the same unperturbed state. I have heard that their purpose is the resurrection or awakening of the Creator. They interfere with the progress of history, making it fit their needs, in order to achieve their goals at a certain point in time. If the trend of the times aren't as they expect, then they will try their best to reverse it. Other than that, they just quietly watch from the sidelines, apathetic. Perhaps they wouldn't act or entrust something even once every few decades or centuries. A secret organization in the true sense of the word. It's consistent with Roselle's description of the powerful faction that secretly manipulates the world. It also seems related to the original creator. Seeing that the spirit body of the Desire Apostle was about to disappear, Klein quickly asked, what is the name of that organization? How can they be contacted? The Desire Apostle looked ahead emotionlessly, his figure quickly disintegrating. Before he disappeared completely, he answered the question, they are called the Twilight Hermit Order. Inside the house with the glass greenhouse. The thin secretary with the gold-rimmed glasses and white gloves sat with a sullen face and a look of deep grief. What's your name? What sequence are you? Which Beyonder pathway are you from? Deacon Cancer asked solemnly. The blonde secretary replied slowly in a deep voice, Lockhart Siakam, Sequence 5, as for which Beyonder pathway I'm from, you can apply for access to my records from MI9. Alright. Cancer then asked, does the Duke come here at a fixed time every week? No, he doesn't like to work according to a schedule, especially after the assassination attempt by Kalangos. Before today, no one knew that he would be here today, and I only heard about it in the morning at Parliament, Lockhart Siakam replied seriously. Cancer thought and asked, if there's a spy amongst you, who do you think he is, and who do you suspect? Lockhart thought about it for a few seconds, then he shook his head. Following that, Cancer asked for details of the battle and got a rough idea of the process. He saw that Lockhart was pale and badly hurt, hence, he politely rose to check on the rest of the Duke's guards. After watching the deacon of the machinery hive mind leave, Lockhart took a deep breath and trudged over to Duke Negan's corpse. The great noble was no longer naked like before, but the remnants of terror still remained on his face. After looking deeply at Duke Negan's corpse, Lockhart murmured sadly, I'm sorry. At this moment, with his back facing everyone, the corners of his mouth slightly curled up. He calmly added inwardly, this is the choice of the times. Westboro, 9, Hope Street, the Prime Minister's residence. Aguisid Negan stood behind a large table and looked at Earl Hall with a serious expression. Lord Hall, my secretary should have briefed you on what has happened. You're the first noble that I've thought of at this moment. The important member of the Conservative Party, who was presently Prime Minister of the Cabinet, looked like he had aged considerably. His tall, thin figure leaned forward as if unable to bear the bad news, to the point of needing to prop himself up on the table with both hands. But his eyes were still sharp and his attitude calm. Earl Hall, who had a beautiful mustache, sighed and said, "I'm sorry to hear this piece of news. It has shocked me greatly. I was thinking of visiting His Grace in a few days to discuss the bill that we're all very concerned about, but who would have known that he would be attacked?" Having lost the handsome appearance of his youth due to his deep smile lines and the fattening state of his body, he first expressed his condolences, grief, and empathy, then he restrained his emotions and said, "His Grace is already dead. Compared to crying and being angry, we need to be more careful and calm. Only by doing this can we handle the aftermath and prevent this heavy steam train of the kingdom from derailing. This is also the reason why I came to you immediately. The other nobles will only call upon their gods, trembling in fear, and express how unacceptable this is. They will want the murderer to be severely punished and the mastermind found. From their point of view, even the Duke who was heavily protected could be assassinated, then what about them?" Prime Minister Reques said in a heavy voice. "It's a perfectly natural and understandable reaction, but it's not the reaction we need." Earl Hall nodded and asked, "Who's the murderer? What was the motive?" "A devil who was disguised as a banker for more than a decade, a true devil. By the way, your Varvat Bank just acquired his business," Reques said, his tone unchanged. "Patrick Jason?" Earl Hall immediately remembered the man's name. He was the one who approved the acquisition of the bank. Without reprimanding him, Prime Minister Reques thoughtfully said, "He's a Sequence 5, but he suddenly sold his business, abandoning an identity which he had used for more than a decade, and took an extreme risk in order to assassinate my brother. From this, we can make a compelling guess that he was instigated by a person or some faction. Unfortunately, he was killed while escaping. Even his spirit body was taken away. According to reports from the Nighthawks, it was done by the hero bandit Dark Emperor. It involves an extremely secretive organization, and we aren't able to find out anything about it in a short period of time." Earl Hall asked. "Yes, that so-called hero bandit didn't leave any traces behind. We can only start with the people who had come into contact with Jason in the past few months. This will take a lot of time, and there may not be any results." Reques gave an affirmative answer. Earl Hall took 2 steps forward and asked, "What's His Majesty's attitude regarding this?" "Grief, but no specific thoughts," Reques replied. Earl Hall frowned and said after some thought, "In that case, the important thing isn't about who's the mastermind behind the scenes, but what goal they wish to achieve through this matter. If they want war, or to restart the conflict in the colonies, then we need to tell the masses that the one instigating Patrick Jason was the Fasak Empire, and we would fabricate a detailed process and provide seemingly convincing evidence. In the past several centuries, this northern neighbor of ours has always played a similar role, and I think everyone is already used to it. I don't think there's any doubt that it's very, very, very normal for the barbarians to do this sort of thing. And the masses will be afraid of them." Prime Minister Reques curled the corners of his lips, without intending to smile. "But we're making a series of changes that will take at least half of next year for us to stabilize before we have the ability to wage war." Earl Hall muttered to himself, "Then let's find a target that everyone will find acceptable. Hero bandit Dark Emperor is too mysterious and likewise for the secret organization behind him. If it's made public just like that, it would definitely incur extreme panic. People are always afraid of the unknown. Yes, what about the Aurora Order? They assassinated that pervert from Intis a few months ago. It wouldn't surprise anyone if they do anything else. Their reputation is bad enough. Their situation has already been repeated by the papers numerous times, to the point of becoming a horror element or classic antagonist in many novels. Besides, it will effectively reduce the suspicions that others have on us. There will always be people that believe the previous assassination was us commissioning the Aurora Order. Also, while we're fighting against the illegal terrorist organization, let's clean up Backland. There are too many dangerous people hidden here." Reques answered tersely in agreement before continuing, "The Aurora Order isn't a bad target. We shall first use them as a target. When the next year comes and we're ready, then we'll publish the results of the investigation, making an accusation that the one instigating the Aurora Order was the Fasak Empire. I believe that no one will care to defend a terrorist organization and the northern barbarians." Earl Hall was taken aback for a moment before saying, "This goes one step further than I thought." Without another word, Aguisid stood up and said, "I'm going to meet His Majesty now." Having said that, he looked at Earl Hall. "You have to be careful of your safety too. We still haven't figured out the motives of the people who assassinated my brother." "Humph, the Church of the Lord of Storms has already agreed to replace the Archbishop of Baklan Diocese. Snake is always late at crucial moments. The believers of the storm are always irritable, irascible, stubborn, conceited, and easily maneuvered by others. Don't be prejudiced. For example, Lumi is very intelligent." Earl Hall let out a low laugh, and then he tapped his chest 4 times. "Thank you, the goddess will protect me. The Twilight Hermit Order sounds very imposing." Returning to the real world, Klein stood up and pressed the mechanical button for the toilet. He walked out of the bathroom amidst the sound of running water and thought about the information he had just received from spirit channeling. He suspected that Twilight Hermit Order was the ancient organization with the second blasphemy slate which Emperor Roselle had joined. To choose to have someone assassinate Duke Negan for the sake of a so-called historical process sounds a little absurd, but it also seems to make sense. Their goal is to revive or awaken the original creator. This is similar to the City of Silver's belief. Little Sun and company have never believed that the creator is dead. They can only accept that he has abandoned that piece of land and has been trying to get a response from him. Klein paced back and forth, letting his thoughts wander. After an unknown amount of time, he suddenly heard knocking on the door. It wasn't an attendant or maid from the Quelag Club, but the bespectacled Carlson, one of the machinery hivemind members whom Klein had seen before. "How did you get in?" Klein asked deliberately. When Carlson saw that he was indeed in the room, he relaxed a little. Seeing that no one was around, he smiled. "As a Beyonder, we often have all sorts of methods." He received news from Deacon Acancer, learning of the Desire Apostle's death, and came to confirm my situation. As for my performance, it's rather successful. My illusion of a living person wasn't exposed, and I successfully pulled the wool over everyone's eyes. Klein's heart had stirred and said, "Your expression tells me that there's good news?" "Yes, Patrick Jason Beria has been killed. You're safe and no longer need to be protected by us," Carlson said honestly. Such feedback made Klein feel the potion inside his body to seemingly accelerate its digestion. Surprised and delighted, he asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes." Carlson gave an affirmative answer. "That's great," Klein said happily. Carlson looked at him and complimented him wholeheartedly. "Your detective instincts and logical thinking have given us a great deal of help. The deacon wrote that after this matter is over, a reward will be given to you in secret. Probably about £1,000. £1,000. Not bad, very generous. However, even if the bills in Jason's suitcase were of £5 or £1 denominations, and even if his jewelry isn't too expensive, it should still add up to about £50,000, right? Ma'am Mary of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council is probably worth that much if one counts her shares in the Quim Company. Yes, Jason's accomplice in luring Spellsinger of God away had probably taken some of the money. The remaining amount is probably around £20,000 to £30,000, but that's still nothing £1,000 can compare with. What a pity. I can't think of it that way. Maybe Jason's accomplice took all the wealth ahead of time. Klein felt a wave of disappointment and joy. And the reward from the machinery hive mind was even more proof of the success of his performance during this period of time. It made him feel like he was only one step away from completely digesting the potion. This is something I should do. After all, the person being threatened is me. Klein smiled. He wasn't worried about retaliation from Jason's accomplice, because revenge was only a ruse. More importantly, he would be a sequence 6 by then. Carlson nudged his glasses and said thoughtfully, "Sherlock, you're also a believer of God. We hope to establish a good relationship with you. In the future, you can inform us of whatever you encounter and gather. This is them developing me into an informant of the machinery hive mind. I have another channel for reimbursement. Klein drew a triangular-shaped sacred emblem on his chest. No problem. No longer being protected by the machinery hive mind, Klein stayed at the Quelag Club until dinner, then he slowly took a carriage back to 15 Minsk Street. He opened the letterbox out of habit and saw a new letter with no postage stamp. The letter was from Detective Isengard Stanton, who left it after an afternoon visit, had written. I heard from the machinery hive mind of the suggestion you offered. Your sharpness and caution is truly astounding. If you weren't already a beyonder, then I would even believe that being a reader is the pathway that suits you best. You truly are the best young man at deduction that I've ever met. Klein stood in the living room, reading Isengard's letter by the light of the gas lamp. This time, there was nothing new to the performance. It was done step by step and conformed to the past performances. It didn't even have much of an effect. But there were enough people in the audience, and all of them were by my side, which allowed me to get feedback directly. Klein held on to the letter as he reflected over the matter. He half closed his eyes and felt something inside his body rapidly disintegrating and dissipating. Numerous illusory stars around him seemed to appear, and he could only feel a very weak attraction from the resplendent stars. On the last month of 1349, his magician potion was finally digested. The street lamps at night illuminated the wet ground, which was sent splashing by the occasional horse carriage that passed by. Backland was located in the middle of the kingdom, only dozens of kilometers from the Sonia Sea, and it rained frequently all year round. The highest temperature in July was only 28 degrees Celsius, and the lowest was around 2 degrees Celsius in winter. The weather seldom had a chance of dropping to 0 or lower, but this didn't stop people from feeling the cold here. Even the northerners from Fasak, who were used to living in ice and snow, sometimes couldn't bear the humidity that penetrated through their clothing and flesh. Klein stood behind the oriel window in a room which didn't have its fireplace lit. He looked at the tranquil scene outside and felt relaxed in his body, heart, and soul. As long as he gathered the ingredients and concocted the potion, he could immediately advance to sequence 6, becoming a faceless. The magician potion has been completely digested. The Desire Apostle was personally finished off by me and he failed to escape. The Aurora Order's search of the Fool's Believers is still going in circles. Apart from Mr. Azek being pursued by an unknown faction and the problem of the potion ingredients, I'm temporarily not troubled by anything. Klein leaned his body forward and took in a breath of air. He then looked at the fog that had condensed on the windows. The reason why he had risked his life to intercept the Desire Apostle was because he was afraid that the other party would have other plans and, thus, smoothly escape from the pursuit of the official Beyonders. At that time, he might be remembered for his crucial advice and be avenged afterwards. As a cold-blooded, a devil was unlikely to take the risk of avenging his comrades, but that didn't mean that they wouldn't choose to vent their anger on someone who nearly caused their death. This operation was definitely necessary. Perhaps someone from the Twilight Hermit Order is somewhere receiving him. Once the Desire Apostle escapes, and with me not having any relevant information, perhaps I'll be prepared against a sequence 5, believing that I would be pretty safe once I advance to Faceless, but the Desire Apostle might very well use the information provided by the Abyss card and the Twilight Hermit Order's help to advance to become a high-sequence Beyonder. Such a development is quite scary if I think about it. One is required to inflict the finishing blow of justice. Klein reflected over what had happened this afternoon and summarized his experiences and lessons. After enjoying the night scenery for a while, he returned to the sofa and sat down to think about his future plans. With the reward provided by the machinery hive mind, I'll be able to afford the mutated pituitary gland and blood of a 1,000-faced hunter. The deep-sea Naga's hair simply requires me to have money. Such an ingredient should be relatively easy to find on the sea. I can get Mr. Hanged Man to help. The only problem is the human-skinned shadow characteristic. And even if there is a clue, I don't have enough money. With this in mind, Klein couldn't help but give a self-deprecating chuckle. I'm not a person who particularly loves money, it's just a very average preference. When I was in Tingen, I always encouraged Melissa to spend and urged her and Benson to hire a maid. I felt that no matter what, I should try to not treat myself too badly, and every time I did a covert operation, I always placed safety first and made sure to be careful so that I wouldn't be affected mentally because of the allure of wealth. However, in order to take revenge, I have to advance, and advancing requires me to buy expensive Beyonder ingredients. I can only accumulate every single penny and save whatever I can. He suddenly hunched his shoulders and felt that the coldness of the living room made a magician like him, who didn't have an excellent constitution, shudder. Therefore, he decided to take a shower, crawl into bed, and read in bed. There's only another 3 or 4 hours left before it's bedtime, there's no need to ignite the fireplace again. With a sigh, Klein got up and walked to the second floor. Under the steam cathedral. After a cancer finished reading all the recorded statements, he picked up his coffee and took a sip. After a few seconds of silence, he pulled out the ancient silver mirror called a Rhodes. Carlson took a glance at it and asked curiously, "Deacon, if I ask the Honorable Rhodes about an unsolved mathematical problem or a classical paradox, will it give me the correct answer?" "Most of the time, it will directly reject you. If it thinks that you have ill intentions, it will even give you a lightning strike or make you suffer a curse that you would never want to face," Xianxia said with a sigh. "It's a living sealed artifact with extremely high intelligence, not a rigid, rule-abiding difference machine. When using it, it's best not to think about trying to find loopholes." Carlson looked around at his teammates and kindly suggested, "Deacon, let me ask the question for you. I have nothing I need to hide." He straightened his back and assumed an open, honest posture. Xianxia smiled bitterly and said, "There's no need, I already know what I need to know. I'm no longer afraid of similar questions, and occasionally, the Honorable Rhodes will ask very profound questions. With your body's condition, the subsequent penalty won't be easy to bear." With that said, he clenched his fists before spreading his fingers apart and gently stroked the surface of the mirror thrice. In that subtle atmosphere, Xianxia asked in a deep voice, "Honorable Rhodes, my question is, who or what faction instigated the Desire Apostle to assassinate Duke Negan?" The silver mirror didn't show any changes for a while. Only after a long time did the surface produce an aqueous light, forming a scene that looked like an oil painting. It was a plain where the sun was about to set. The vast field was covered in a faint golden afterglow. "What does that mean?" Carlson and the other members of the machinery hive mind looked at each other, unable to understand. Even though one of them was a Beyonder who had advanced from mystery prior and was no stranger at reading revelations. Twilight? The symbol of the end of life? A sect that believes in death, or lunatics that believe in the apocalypse? A mystery prior said after some deliberation. Carlson nodded in agreement. "I think it's the latter." Xianxia ignored their discussion because Rhodes's question had already appeared. "What color of underwear do you like best?" Xianxia's face suddenly flushed red, and he felt as if smoke was rising from the top of his head. With great difficulty, he spat out a word, "red." The room suddenly became unusually quiet, and Carlson and the others pretended to look towards a corner. Xianxia sat down wearily and scratched his fluffy hair, ready to ask the second question. Carlson couldn't bear it as he said, "Deacon, let me try. Try not to reach the punishment phase." Xianxia finally nodded in agreement. Carlson confidently mimicked the deacon's actions, gently stroking the surface of the silver mirror 3 times while the other members gathered again. "Honorable Rhodes, my question is, who are the accomplices of the Desire Apostle?" The aqueous light stirred as the scene changed. It first presented a woman's back, one with an outstanding figure. Then, there was a person who was extremely blurry and could barely be identified as a man based on his attire. There is indeed another partner. This should be the person who sold the intelligence on Duke Negan. It's a pity that the other party has already dealt with it. Carlson looked around and said. He felt that he had no secrets and didn't need to care about the questions that followed. This time, the choices that Rhodes offered was a question, a mission, or a penalty. Without any hesitation, Carlson said, "Question." Words that looked like dripping blood quickly outlined the surface of the silver mirror. Do you relieve yourself daily with your hand? Carlson's lips quivered, and he felt his ears rapidly turn hot. Although this was something he found very normal, giving an answer in front of so many teammates and his superior still gave him the urge to bury his head in the ground. Yes. He answered very quietly. Under St. Samuel Cathedral. Daily, with her blue eyeshadow, tossed a stack of documents in front of Sola Sure Soist. All the information you want on the tarot card case. It's smaller than I thought, Soist said, slightly surprised. Daly snickered. This is just an index. Upon seeing this, Leonard touched his lower lip with the palm of his red-gloved right hand. Captain Soist, why don't we do a thorough investigation of the people who interacted with Jason Beria and compare it with the 2 previous cases? There might be clues to the organization that is symbolized by tarot cards. Duke Negan is a devout believer of the Lord of Storms, and he represents the interests of the Church of the Lord of Storms in the political scene. The mandated punishers will definitely be frantically searching for the real culprit, so we don't need to get involved, otherwise, we'll easily be put at odds with them. Let's investigate the cases involving the tarot cards, and who knows, we might find new clues. Of course, we'll definitely end up running all over the place, but that's part and parcel of a Red Glove's duties, Soist explained with a smile. Leonard nodded. I understand. And deep in his mind, the elderly voice Skadden laughed. The Nighthawks have missed it just like that. That person has the smell of the Dark Emperor, the true Dark Emperor. Inside the Holy Wind Cathedral. Wearing a black bonnet, Spellsinger of God, Ace Snake, swept his silver eyes and picked a mandated Punisher elite. Although I'm about to leave Backland, this is the decision of the Council of Cardinals. You only have one mission after this, and that is to investigate the assassination of Duke Negan. After applying, all of you have the right to use a Grade 1 sealed artifact. You must find out who is targeting us. Standing at the very front, a middle-aged man wearing a modified captain's hat immediately led the group. He clenched his fist and lightly tapped his chest. As you command, Your Eminence. He was lean and had no particularly outstanding features, but there was an anchor tattoo on his neck. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. Audrey looked at Susie, who had opened the door herself, and said in a low voice, "What's father and the others talking about?" When she found out that Earl Hall had returned late and that his expression was unusually grave, she immediately sent Susie in to listen. Duke Negan was assassinated. Susie closed the door behind her with her feet. Ah? Audrey froze, suspecting that she had misheard. Although she had already experienced an assassination attempt on Duke Negan, she had never thought that this powerful noble would actually die. It's true. Susie gave an affirmative answer. Audrey instantly felt a little blank, finding it a little surreal. How could such a powerful noble, a person of flesh and blood, capable of speaking and laughing, the Duke who had given her a piece of land, die just like that? Suddenly, she felt the cruelty and coldness of the adult world. Who did it? Audrey asked subconsciously. A Sequence 5 devil, Sequence answered quickly. But he has already been silenced by the so-called hero bandit Dark Emperor. Ah? Audrey was stunned once again. How could it be the hero bandit Dark Emperor? How could it be Mr. Fool's adorer? He helped me resolve the problem of Duke Negan's previous assassination. This is a complete contradiction. Audrey immediately told Susie to eavesdrop again while she locked the door behind her and sat at the edge of her bed, praying to Mr. Fool. After she had finished reciting his honorific name and had described the assassination of Duke Negan, she asked with great trust, "Was your adorer present there?" After a while, she saw the endless gray fog and heard the voice of the Fool. Yes. He's looking for the organization that directed the Desire Apostle. As expected, it wasn't arranged by Mr. Fool. Was the reason why he had his adorer stop Kalengos last time also because of that organization that's pulling the strings behind the scenes? Audrey relaxed and asked curiously, "What organization is that?" "For it to gain your attention." A second later, she heard Mr. Fool reply in an unperturbed manner, "Twilight Hermit Order." Twilight Hermit Order. What kind of organization is it? Why haven't I heard of it? When Mr. Hanged Man was filling me in on the general knowledge of the various factions, he didn't even mention anything about this. Audrey was both surprised and confused. As the gray fog faded away, Mr. Fool's aloof figure had vanished. Her eyes darted around as she quickly made a guess. This organization known as the Twilight Hermit Order sounds even more powerful and mysterious than the other underground powers such as the Aurora Order and the Life School of Thought. It's so unknown that even the knowledgeable and experienced Mr. Hanged Man, who's closely related to the Church of the Lord of Storms, doesn't know of its existence. And their plot was directed at a powerful noble of the kingdom, one of the most powerful people in the world. They might be the observers hidden in the deepest depths of the Beyonder world, the true controllers. They influence the situation of the northern and southern continents, so it's no wonder that they would be noticed by Mr. Fool. The last time Mr. Hanged Man successfully got his adorer to help wasn't because the promised reward was sufficiently high, but because Mr. Fool himself was targeting Twilight Hermit Order. This organization is as mysterious as our tarot club. Audrey, for some inexplicable reason, became a little excited, and this diluted the impact Duke Negan's assassination had on her. There definitely aren't a lot of Beyonders who know of the existence of the Twilight Hermit Order. And I'm one of them, and we, the Tarot Club, are targeting them. Audrey stood up and walked to the full-body mirror in front of her. She raised her chin slightly, showing an abnormally beautiful angle. Staring at the girl in the mirror, Audrey slowly calmed down. This was the first time she felt it was imperative that she quickly raised her sequence. Even Duke Negan, a Beyonder under tremendous amounts of protection, can be assassinated, let alone Father who's just an ordinary person. Although based on the family vault situation, there are definitely many Beyonders in the family, and the Church of the Goddess will also provide additional protection. However, this doesn't ease my heart. Duke Negan's guards aren't any weaker than what we have. All the best, Audrey, get to sequence 7 as soon as possible, then sequence 6, and then hide in the darkness. I'll be my father, mother, and brother's last line of defense. The capital of the Rorstad archipelago, the city of generosity. The Blue Avenger was once again passing by, moored at the port, giving sailors a chance to indulge and vent. Alger Wilson changed into a robe embroidered with storm patterns and went to the largest cathedral on the archipelago, the Cathedral of Waves. It was classical in style, and it mostly used stone pillars and arched structures, and it had a towering dome and 2 clock towers. In the early days of colonization, the pioneers often had no time to build a cathedral, which brought about very serious consequences for them. Surrounded by tribes, jungles, and ancient buildings, they would often die mysteriously in great numbers for no reason at all, even after they had conquered the region. This situation, which had caused a great panic, gradually deteriorated after the cathedrals of the various churches were built, becoming something that happened only once in a while. Standing in front of the cathedral, Alger was in no hurry to enter. Instead, he looked through the narrow windows at the dark and mysterious atmosphere and the warm candlelight that illuminated the activity area. A few seconds later, he entered the grand prayer hall, clenched his right fist and struck his left chest. He turned to the bishop facing him and said, "May the storm be with you." "May the storm be with you," the bishop responded in the same way. Without waiting for Alger to speak, the bishop of the Cathedral of Waves took out a telegram. "You're just in time. The Council of Cardinals has issued orders. Read it before praying." "What orders?" Alger asked casually as he reached out to take it. The bishop's expression was grave as he said, "Duke Negan has been assassinated. The Council of Cardinals has ordered all mandated Punisher and priests to pay attention to anything regarding the hero bandit Dark Emperor, as well as all the matters related to the tarot ritual." Hero bandit Dark Emperor? Alger perfectly expressed his surprise. He already knew that the Dark Emperor was Mr. Fool's adorer. The bishop said with a serious nod, "The assassin of Duke Negan is a Sequence 5 devil, but while escaping, he was killed by hero bandit Dark Emperor. This is the same outcome as Rear Admiral Kalangos, who failed to assassinate the Duke. Not only are the superficial circumstances the same, but even the core issues are the same." It was also Mr. Fool's adorer who killed Kalangos, another adorer. Was Mr. Fool the one who really wanted Duke Negan dead? No, if it were really him, then he would have warned Kalangos the last time to be careful of Miss Justice, so as to not expose his identity on the spot. Mr. Fool is paying attention to the truth behind the assassination and the real murderer? Who could it be, or which organization would receive so much attention from Mr. Fool? Alger instantly thought of many things and made a preliminary judgment. He looked down at the telegram and saw that the church had set up a special investigation team for the assassination of Duke Negan. Every member was an elite of the mandated punishers. Should I apply to join, so as to have a grasp of their actions at any time? Alger hesitated for a moment. In the end, he decided to follow his original plan and keep a low profile. With a brand new day, Klein slept until he woke up naturally. He slowly got up, washed his face, and went downstairs. He wasn't in a hurry to prepare breakfast. Instead, he habitually opened the door, bathed in the fog, and took out today's newspaper from the letterbox. What is it? Suddenly, he noticed that there was a thick envelope stuffed inside the newspaper. It wasn't light at all. Squeezing the surface, Klein's mind flashed with the faint fragrance of banknote ink. His spiritual intuition told him that there was a lot of cash inside. Carefully, he opened it and pulled out the stack of money. After counting the money, he confirmed that there was a total of 1,000 pounds. It's the reward money from the machinery hive mind. Is this their way of secretly handing me the money? How can they be so certain this is fine? Leaving it in my mailbox just like that? What happens if it's stolen? The delighted Klein couldn't help but grumble. With this money, and without the machinery hive mind protecting him in secret, he could go to Vampire Emlyn White to complete the previous transaction. After breakfast, Klein immediately put on his coat and hat, held his cane, and stuffed the newspaper in his arm and went out. On his way to the carriage stop, he saw his landlord, Mrs. Stellan Sammer, directing the maid to load the suitcase into the carriage in front of the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Sammer." Klein smiled and greeted her. Stellan smiled modestly and returned the greeting. "She seems to have recovered mentally. Who knows what happened to her?" Klein curiously asked, "Where are you going?" "It's almost New Year's. Mary gave Luke some time off in advance. We're going to Desi Bay to usher in the new year," Stellan said proactively. "Sigh, we've been to a few of the cities there, including the famous coastal towns. This time, we're preparing to go to Fainapotter. I've heard that the scenery in Seville City is quite good." Klein replied in jest, "How enviable. What about you? Detective Moriarty, where do you plan on spending the new year?" Stellan asked with a smile. "I'm probably staying here." "Oh right, I have to prepare some tools to repair the wall which Stewart had previously shot a hole in." Klein smirked and said, "Back to mid-seashore, where the winter smells different." The smile on Stellan's face became even more obvious. "I hope to meet you at Desi Bay in future New Year's Eve celebrations. South of the bridge, Rose Street, Harvest Church." Upon seeing Detective Sherlock Moriarty in his black tweed coat, Emlyn White, who was carefully wiping the candle stand, smiled. He combed his hair, walked over with his head held high and said in a low voice, "There's information on Jason Beria. A sanguine knows him. I have his information as well." Klein smiled as he handed the newspaper over. The headline read, "Yesterday, His Grace the Duke of Negan assassinated, a true devil plundering the land." Beneath the title was a detailed description of the assassination yesterday, and it revealed that the murderer was a banker named Patrick Jason who was killed on the spot, and the terrorist organization, the Aurora Order, claimed responsibility. When he saw the news earlier, Klein, who was having his breakfast, almost spewed out the milk in his mouth. At first, he imagined that the Aurora Order's Mr. A was brain damaged to take responsibility for this matter. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was most likely a cover used by the officials. If the Twilight Hermit Order is really the ancient organization which Emperor Roselle joined, then they would be extremely hostile towards the Aurora Order. After all, they hate the true creator. This thought suddenly flashed through Klein's mind. Emlyn looked blankly at the newspaper again and again before asking in disbelief, "Does this mean the information I got is useless?" "In theory." Klein gave the vampire gentleman a sympathetic look. "However, the official organizations are still investigating the masterminds behind Jason Beria. If your information points in the right direction, it should be of worth." As for Klein himself, he obviously didn't want to get involved in this matter anymore. No. He only knew Jason Beria and some of his hobbies. Emlyn sighed. Seeing his reaction, Klein asked in amusement, "Don't you usually read newspapers? How did you only learn of such an important matter until now?" Emlyn gave him an odd glance. "Why should I read the newspapers? I'm very busy. Busy cleaning the Harvest Church, busy spending time with those dolls you have at home, and busy thinking of ways to trick people into giving you blood to drink. You really are a New Age vampire." Klein opened his mouth, but he used his clown powers to suppress the laughter he was about to let out. He didn't tease Emlyn White and said seriously, "I've already gathered enough money for those 2 ingredients. When can you give them to me?" For 31, a drowning man shouldn't desperately clutch at straws. Plus, turn off reset. Upon hearing Klein's question, Emlyn White jumped in fright as he carefully sized him up and said, "You're richer than I thought." He had imagined that Sherlock Moriarty would take at least a week to raise £2,450. "I've been saving for a long time." Klein sighed in response. Emlyn nodded thoughtfully. "It's so lucrative being a private detective? This is just an identity that makes things convenient. If you don't encounter a huge bounty, it'll be £200 to £300 a year," Klein said frankly. Emlyn glanced at him and asked casually, "So what do you actually do? Smuggling arms? Stealing from the vaults of the rich and powerful?" For Beyonders below Sequence 7, there's not much that can be done to save up more than £2,000 so quickly, and most of them are grey areas that border on breaking the law. "You, a vampire, are talking to me about breaking the law? It seems like you're rather eager to make some quick money." Klein smiled. "Except some relatively dangerous missions, if you aren't afraid of death, you can try." Emlyn shut his mouth, and only after a long time did he say, "Come and find me in the evening. I'll take you to the seller's place." What an obedient vampire. Klein was about to agree, but he suddenly found it unsafe. What if the seller gets thoughts from seeing all the money? What if he doesn't have the corresponding Beyonder ingredients and is trying to fool me to commit a robbery? Emlyn White can be trusted, but not necessarily the seller he's introducing. I have to find an excuse to perform a divination above the grey fog to confirm the degree of danger. Yes, there's no need for it to be so complicated. There's a better way. After some thought, Klein turned his head to look at Emlyn. "No, go by yourself. I'll give you £1,000 as a deposit, and you'll bring the 2 ingredients to the Harvest Church. After confirmation, I'll pay the remaining balance. I believe the seller will accept this method. This will show the credit of a noble sanguine." Upon being flattered, Emlyn unconsciously lifted his chin. "There's no problem with this way of trading." Saying that, he let out a laugh. "Are you afraid that the other party will not keep their word? Are you more at ease in the Harvest Church? Of course, anyone would feel safe when they see a Mother Earth adorer by the side, who is over 2.2 meters tall and has exceptionally firm muscles." Klein smiled and pointed at Father Utravsky. "People who can deal with him wouldn't mind £2,000 to £3,000. Emlyn's face darkened, and he snorted. "Aren't you worried that I'll steal the £1,000 deposit?" Klein casually looked straight ahead. "Why should I be worried? You will come back here every day, making it easy to find you, and a living creature like a vampire would sell for more than £1,000. Emlyn, who had been hit in a sore spot, muttered in exasperation, "Sanguine. Do you understand? Sanguine. Also, don't call me a creature." Klein chuckled and didn't say anything as he waited for Emlyn to calm down. "We'll do it the way you requested." Finally, Emlyn reached out and rubbed his temples. Klein immediately took out the envelope he had received that morning, and he handed it to him along with a thick stack of cash worth £1,000. See you here at 8 tonight. After counting the bills and after confirming that there was no mistake, Emlyn warily stole a glance at Father Yutravsky and said in a low voice, "Mr. Private Detective, with you being in contact with a lot of intelligence and news, have you heard of an evil god known as the Fool?" Evil? Evil? UF. Inwardly, Klein nearly threw out a profanity. He answered with the most normal expression, "Many people are searching for believers of the Fool recently. Are you planning on joining their ranks to obtain the relevant bounty?" Emlyn sighed and said, "No, I'm only considering whether I should ask this evil god or the evil soul to help me dispel the psychological cue. As you know, the rumors going around include his specific honorific name, and as long as it's converted into Hermes or Ancient Hermes, it's possible to get a response. What do you know about him? How much harm will he bring to his believers? Will he forcefully change the believers' views? Although it points to me, I still have to say. My dear vampire friend, you are like a drowning man desperately clutching at straws." Feeling mixed emotions, Klein said, "The Fool is very mysterious. Up to this day, apart from the news you already know, no one knows of his detailed situation. For example, how vast his clergy is, or what sort of corresponding prayer rituals there are. What puzzles me is that you aren't considering the two of your sanguine's ancestor, the ancient goddess Lilith. As long as the ritual is correct and the offerings are appropriate, she will help you dispel the psychological cue." Emlyn leaned back slightly and stared straight ahead, saying nothing for several seconds. He seemed to instantly become sullen. After a brief moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "Before the cataclysm, the ancestor had already rarely responded to prayers. Only certain special circumstances allowed us to get her help. This does not include the removal of a psychological cue. In the legends of the City of Silver, the ancient goddess, Lilith, who represented the moon, had already had her authority taken back by the awakened creator, or perhaps she had fallen in some battle among the gods earlier on. Then, who is the one occasionally responding to the sanguine's pleas? The primordial moon?" Klein deliberately pressed, "Then, there's still the primordial moon to pray to. Many underground beyonders have rituals that borrow his power. This is mainly referring to the shaman king and the corresponding biological creatures." Klein added inwardly. Emlyn's lips quivered, but he didn't speak as there was an indescribable fear on his face. After a long time, he solemnly said, "I suspect that the primordial moon was impersonated by some evil god or a high-level devil. People who pray to him mostly experience change, turning cruel, crazy, and even filled with desire. And the remaining ones, with the sanguine mainly, there is a higher chance of them losing control and becoming true monsters. There was once a powerful sanguine that tried to pray due to some danger, but she ended up turning into nothing but a hunk of meat that only knows to mate and reproduce. She, together with bulls, rams, stallions, mice, and even plants and rocks, gave birth to one strange descendant after another. Each one of them developed their own monster species. Thankfully, she was quickly eliminated along with her descendants. The primordial moon is that dangerous? There was no mention of it in the Book of Secrets. Had Shaman King Klarman's thoughts been corrupted? Fortunately, I only referenced, modified, and prayed to myself. Klein's heart raced in fright as a result of Emlyn White's description. This made him acutely realize that the hidden existences other than the seven deities were indeed not that trustworthy. Except me. He sighed. At that moment, Emlyn smiled bitterly and said, "If the negative effects brought by the Fool isn't that great, praying to him might be something to consider. The only effect is that you will pay a certain amount of money for it." In order to maintain his image, Klein could only pat Emlyn on the shoulder and draw a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. It's very dangerous to pray to a hidden existence that you don't know about. If you're considering that, you might as well choose a faith out of the seven deities you prefer. They won't affect your daily life and won't make you abandon your dolls. If there's really no other way. Emlyn suddenly found himself calmer than he had expected. Klein didn't linger on. He pushed his way out into the aisle and walked out of the Harvest Church. Looking out at the misty sky, he began to think about what to do next. There was no doubt that his current focus was on saving money and finding the ingredients. Little son's side needs to stabilize a little more. To prevent him from being suspected again, I'll use the method of ridding a rampager's mental corruption as the promised payment. The deep-sea Naga's hair can be entrusted to Mr. Hanged Man. I'll have to rely on myself for the human-skinned shadows characteristic. There hasn't been any relevant information from Emlyn White and Eye of Wisdom, Mr. Stanton, for over a month. I'll have to try different channels. Yes, it's been quite long. It's likely that the high-sequence Beyonder of the Rose School of Thought isn't monitoring the Bravehearts bar that closely. I'll go visit it in the evening and see if I can contact Miss Sharon and Merrick. Klein quickly had an idea. In order to go to Braveheart's bar, he had to first go to East Borough and change his workers' clothes in the one-bedroom apartment he also rented on Black Palm Street. As he thought of this, he walked towards the carriage stop on the opposite side of the road. West Borough, inside Grim Cemetery. Furs Wall, who was dressed in a black veiled hat, quietly walked beside Dorian Gray, a member of the Abraham family. She had accompanied him to place flowers on Lawrence, Elisa, and company's graves. While walking silently, her thoughts were completely focused on the Beyonder ingredient, the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch. She knew that she had already digested the apprentice potion, and as long as she could get the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch, she would become a trickmaster. However, she ultimately lacked the clues related to it, and the son, that she had the most expectations at being able to help her, didn't dare to hold a ritual or invite friends to hunt Spirit Eaters because of what had happened before. In order to advance as quickly as possible and escape the curse of the full moon, she had even asked Mr. Fool for help, hoping that his adorers could help her find the ingredients. In the process, she revealed that she had published her new book and was about to receive a fixed fee for the book. In order to prove that she had sufficient power to purchase it, she didn't fear that her real identity would be known by Mr. Fool, because she believed that Mr. Fool clearly knew it. In the secluded, quiet, and cold environment, Furs and Dorian stopped at Lawrence's grave. Looking at the photo taken after his death and reading the epitaph, "He's a good teacher," Dorian Gray remained silent for a long time before sighing. How ironic. Why? Furs asked in surprise. She had heard Lawrence mention that he was a public school teacher in Constant City, Mid-Seashire, and that was why she had used such an epitaph. This has nothing to do with you. It has to do with our family. Dorian gave a self-deprecating laugh and bent down to put down the flowers. After straightening his body, he looked straight ahead, and suddenly spoke out, "Furs, do you want to become a Beyonder? The kind I described in my letter." Dorian Gray's question didn't surprise Furs at all. She had been prepared after keeping in contact with him for the past month, and she had even asked the experienced Mr. Hanged Man at the Tarot Club to decide what kind of expression and reaction she should use when faced with the question. "Are there really such Beyonders?" Furs asked in surprise. Dorian gently nodded. Yes. He looked around to make sure that there was no one around, then he walked up to a tree with fallen leaves and pressed his hand on it. Dorian's figure suddenly blurred, as if turning into a reflection in the water. When it was clear, he had already appeared behind the tree, his posture unchanging. "Oh God! That's really, really amazing." Remembering the teachings of Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice, her mouth opened in a semicircle as she exclaimed. Dorian walked back, smiled, and asked, "Do you want to become such a Beyonder?" Furs fell silent for a moment before she answered him excitedly. Yes. Now that she was finally going to be a periphery member of the Abraham family, many things would be much easier for her in the future. Her heart was filled with genuine joy. Dorian laughed before turning his expression grave, asking in all seriousness, "Are you willing to be my student?" Furs nodded. Yes. Dorian let out a sigh of relief and then made a self-deprecating comment. "I'm not a good teacher, I even taught a..." There's no need to mention the past anymore. In short, don't hold too high of an expectation. After considering it over this period of time, he had decided to learn from his previous experiences and lessons. He didn't tell Furs the situation regarding the Abraham family and only treated their relationship as one of teacher and student. That way, he didn't have to worry about the other party coveting his family's few remaining mystical items. No, your explanations of mysticism are excellent, really, Mr. Gray. No, teacher. Furs quickly confirmed the relationship between them. Dorian looked at the tombstone, shook his head, and exhaled. I wasn't planning on taking in any more students, but your noble character infected me. If nothing unexpected happens, I can give you the corresponding potion today. Today? Furs asked, surprised. Back when she went to Backland Station to pick up Dorian Gray, she noticed that he was carrying only a very small suitcase, barely enough for a change of clothes. There was no evidence that he had any Beyonder ingredients on him. Does he have his own resources and channels in Backland, ones that belong to the Abraham family? Furs made a vague guess. Her original plan was to rely on the inconvenience of the distance between them to sell off the Beyonder ingredients for the apprentice potion, and then tell him that she had successfully advanced to become a Beyonder. This way, she was able to obtain a considerable amount of cash, as well as to avoid the tragic consequence of taking the apprentice potion again and having to spend time to digest it. Yes. Without explaining, Dorian pointed in the other direction. Let's go see Labero and Alisa first. Taking a turn, they left Grim Cemetery and returned to the house in Sherwood Borough which Furs and Zio had rented. For the past month or so, Zio, who had advanced to sheriff, had been leaving early and returning late every day in order to pay off her heavy debts. She had been trying hard to get every bounty she could get, so there was no doubt that she was at the house around noon. Is there a quiet room? Dorian looked around casually. Plenty. Furs led her new teacher into the activity room on the first floor. Dorian circled the room, checked the surroundings, and then asked Furs to light a candle mixed with a piece of dark red sandalwood. He closed the door and drew the curtains. He walked to the candle and took out 2 bottles of essential oil and some common herbal powders. Holding a ritual? Shouldn't there be 3 candles? Furs curiously watched from the side and didn't rashly open her mouth, as if she was stunned by the atmosphere. After finishing the first part of the ritual, Dorian took a step back and, with a serious expression, switched to the language of ancient Hermes. I summon in my name. Special spirit bodies roaming the upper realms, the void creature that loves music, Dorian Gray Abraham's contract companion. Whoosh! There was a sudden gust of wind in the activity room, and with a sobbing voice, the flickering candle flames were tinged with a deep blue hue. The rings of light quickly spread out, forming a door that was beyond the concept of normality. A ball of semi-illusory and half-corporeal objects flew out from the bottom of the circle of light. Its entire body was colored a milky white. There were no eyes, nose, arms, or legs around it. Only an opening which resembled a mouth cracked open over its surface. Dorian grinned, opened his mouth, and began to hum a gentle folk lullaby. The ball swayed left and right, appearing extremely satisfied. After he finished humming, Dorian extended his hand. Malmouth, give me the items that I deposited with you the day before yesterday. The ball jumped up and down as its body suddenly swelled while it opened its mouth extremely wide. Then, it spat out 2 Beyonder ingredients which had strange lusters to them. To think that can be done. Furs stared in surprise. Dorian caught the apprentice potion's main ingredients, cancelled the summoning, and ended the ritual. He turned his head and smiled at Furs. Even in the spirit world, void creatures like Malmouth are extremely rare. Under normal circumstances, summoning rituals will not point to them. An elder of a sufficiently high sequence must enter the spirit world and, after a long period of searching, make a contract with one of them. That way, it will allow subsequent descendants to complete a summoning ritual with their corresponding name. After the void creature arrives, a new contract can be made, making them closely connected to oneself and no longer summonable by others. So that's how it is. That sounds interesting. Furs said from the bottom of her heart. She couldn't help but look forward to the future. If I don't consider the curse of the full moon, or how ordinary Beyonders are being suppressed and constantly facing danger, exploring this wonderful world would be the most delightful thing. I hope that one day I can truly roam the spirit world. Dorian responded with a chuckle. Malmutha's greatest ability is to swallow many items into its belly without causing them any harm. It's the equivalent of a mobile, hidden warehouse that almost no one can find. Of course, it can't store too much as its stomach has limited space. Also, it doesn't like people without talent in music. It would reject signing a contract with such people. At least I can play the lyre. Just as Furs breathed a sigh of relief, Dorian instructed her to get him a black stew pot. Realizing that he was about to concoct the potion right there and then, she maintained her expression, but her heart was frantically praying for an accident. I don't want to drink the apprentice potion again. That would waste a lot of time. If I had known that this would happen, then I would have been more honest. It's too late to tell the truth. Teacher Gray must have tried a divination attempt, but the outcome suffered interference. Confessing now would mean that there's a powerful person backing me or instigating me. In the midst of her thoughts, she saw Dorian turn around and hand her a bottle of the bubbling potion. Drink it and you'll become a beyonder, Dorian said in a flat but very seductive tone. Then he reassured her, don't worry. There won't be any problems with me here. Okay. Furs gritted her teeth, received the apprentice potion, and drank it all in one gulp. At the same time, a thought flashed in her mind. Honesty is the best policy. The carriage stopped outside East Borough, and Klein, walking with a cane and a hat, entered the spacious slum in a relatively decent neighborhood. As he walked forward, he saw two familiar figures emerge from the relatively clean apartment in front of him. They were girls, one 17 or 18 years old, the other 15 or 16 years old, daughters of the laundry maid, Liv, Freja, and Daisy. The latter had once been kidnapped by Capim and was rescued by the Dark Emperor. Daisy also spotted Klein and smiled brightly. Good afternoon, Detective Moriarty. Klein smiled and nodded before asking in puzzlement, Daisy, don't you have public elementary school to attend? At the behest of reporters like Mike Joseph and the push by the Church of the Evernight Goddess, the Backland government established a charity fund with Capim's estate, specifically to help women and families who had been hurt by Capim. Daisy's family took advantage of the opportunity to move from a shabby apartment in an environment with poor security to the outskirts of East Borough. They moved from one room to two, separating the laundry area from the place where they ate and slept. In addition, Daisy received a bursary for attending a public elementary school, and she was delighted that the charity fund was responsible for her tuition and meals costing 3 pence a week. What puzzled Klein was that the public elementary school only had breaks on Sundays, so Daisy wasn't supposed to be here at this time. The school is very close. I took advantage of the afternoon break to return and help Freja bring the washed and dried laundry to a client. She and Mother can't handle the workload, Daisy answered frankly. The immediate effect of her going to school was that the amount of laundry which Liv and Freja could do every day decreased, obviously lowering their family income. If it wasn't for Mike's help applying for a grant from the charity, then they wouldn't be able to maintain their present lives. Therefore, there was no doubt that Freja wouldn't be able to enter a public elementary school, and when Daisy and Klein talked about it, her eyes were filled with unconcealed envy and pain. Despite not even being 18 years old yet, all she could do was silently watch her sister attend school. Klein noticed that detail and deliberately reminded Daisy, you really should know that your mother and Freja are having a hard time. Treat them well. Daisy nodded seriously and said, I've thought about it. When things settle down, I'll teach Freja what I learned during the day at night and on Sundays. I'll be her only tutor. Freja's eyes suddenly blinked, and she couldn't help lowering her head. Good, very good, Klein praised her before bidding them farewell in a good mood, and he turned to another street. He went to Black Palm Street to change out of his worker clothes, and just after he left the apartment where he was renting a room from, he saw an old middle-aged man walk over. He asked with a kind face, Sir, have you heard of the original creator? The original creator? Klein was stunned for a moment, and then he immediately thought of the intelligence that old Kohler had previously given him. Recently, there had been people preaching the faith of the original creator in East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district. It pushed the belief that he hadn't really passed away and that he existed in the body of every human being and every object. As long as one served him wholeheartedly and praised him, then not only would his believers be redeemed after death, but they would also enter his kingdom. They would also suffer tremendous improvements in their present life, for instance, having sizzling meat to eat every day. This was very close to the Aurora Order's theory of the mutated creator, so Klein had decided that it was the secret organization which was behind it. He felt that they had begun to value the vast majority of the poor after the Lenivus incident. They've already developed so arrogantly to even solicit people on the streets? Klein hesitated and replied, I've heard of that. The well-dressed middle-aged man immediately revealed a smile. Then, do you know about the incoming apocalypse? Do you know that the original creator will create a sanctuary to protect his believers? For a moment, Klein thought of going with the flow and be inoculated so as to slowly infiltrate the Aurora Order's periphery organization, so as to gather the appropriate evidence and clues to take revenge on them for seeking the believers of the fool. But after careful consideration, he felt that it was too dangerous. It was something that was tiring and troublesome for him to do alone, without any certainty of success. In the end, he decided to inform the machinery hive mind about the current situation and leave it to the official organizations to handle. After thinking through the problem, Klein's expression immediately darkened. I don't know, and I don't want to know. He strode forward, shaking off the middle-aged man and ignoring his shouts. On the way out of East Borough, he watched carefully and found that the workers who had lost their jobs due to the off-season and the efficiency improvements from textile machines were grouped together. They were being comforted and were listening to the preaches from people of unknown identities. The investigations of East Borough, the dock area, and factory district were completed 2 months ago. Why haven't the 3 churches and Parliament produced any concrete measures yet? The importance that they've placed on this issue must have increased. It's impossible for them to not notice the current situation. Is this a trap for bigger fish? That's very risky and can easily get out of hand. As Klein lampooned, he pushed the cap on his head as he walked out of East Borough and went straight to the Backland Bridge area. At noon, the Bravehearts bar had just opened, and there were almost no drunkards present. Only the nearby, busy workers would come in and grab a simple lunch. Klein mingled with them and spent 10 pence on wheat bread with pork sausages and a glass of Southville beer, making himself appear rather rich. After leisurely filling his stomach and finishing his beer, he looked at the bartender. Is Casper's Colleen in here? He planned on replenishing some of his ordinary ammunition while he was here. The bartender glanced at him. It seems like you haven't been here in a while? Casper's is dead. It said that he was a little restless while sleeping at night, wrapping himself in a tight bundle and suffocating himself in the end. Heh, I don't really believe that kind of thing would happen. I've only heard about such things in ghost stories, but that's what those black and white dogs say. Black and white dogs were referring to the police who wore black and white checked uniforms. Suffocating himself to death? That sounds like mysticism. Was it because the Rose School of Thought's high-sequence Beyonder was unable to find Miss Sharon and Merrick, and thus, they chose to kill someone to vent their anger? Where's the bearing of being a high-sequence Beyonder? In that case, Casper's wasn't able to contact Miss Sharon. Perhaps they've already left Backland. Casper's wasn't prepared for the dangers of the Beyonder world. If it were me, I wouldn't have returned to the Bravehearts bar. I would have taken all the money I saved up and go to another city for a change in environment. However, under normal circumstances, a high-sequence Beyonder wouldn't specially deal with such ordinary people. At most, they would force a mediumship ritual without considering the after-effects. As expected of the self-indulgent Rose School of Thought. To think a high-sequence Beyonder would actually do such a thing. While feeling surprised, Klein also felt pity for the black market arms dealer. The bartender wiped a cup and continued, if you wish to buy some stuff, there's a new dealer. Who? Klein asked in passing. Old man. He's in billiard room 3, the bartender said without looking up. Klein immediately stood up, slowly walked towards that familiar place, and knocked on the unlocked door. Come in. A voice rang out. This voice sounds a little familiar. Klein pushed open the door and looked inside. Standing by the table was a boy that didn't look too old. He was dressed in an old overcoat, a brown bowler hat, and had bright red eyes. It was Ian, whom Klein had met when he first arrived in Backland. Back then, he was entrusted with the case of Detective Real's disappearance and was ultimately involved in the conflict over the manuscripts of a third-generation difference machine. He had been forced to pay a high price to have Mr. A from the Aurora Order kill the Intis ambassador that was sent to the Lone Kingdom, Bakerland Jean Mudun. "It's you, Detective Moriarty?" Ian was startled. He had deliberately stuck 2 whiskers above his mouth to make himself look older. Klein smiled as he entered the billiard room and closed the door in passing. "Long time no see." He was initially surprised that Ian had appeared here and had become a black market arms dealer, but then he thought of the details behind the matter and found that it made sense. Klein being able to come to the Bravehearts bar and find Casper's Kalinin was all thanks to Ian's introduction. This teenage boy definitely had some connections around here. "Yeah." Ian wiped away his shocked expression and mumbled, "I went to Pritz Harbor for 2 months and found those guys to be so savage and cruel. They didn't even have the slightest bit of modesty or love for children, so I had no choice but to return to Backland and do what I was good at. When Caspers died, I decided to switch careers." Before Klein could say anything, he added, "Mr. Detective, I've always kept in mind that I still owe you 2 requests. There's no need to explain so much, nor do I care what you've done in the past. Although I've always thought that your escape from MI9 was suspicious, I didn't care too much about it." Klein picked up a cue stick, gestured, and said, "Other than dealing in black market weapons, you seem to be selling information?" "Yes," Ian answered very calmly. "What do you want to know?" "It's free. Very straightforward. Feeling guilty about what happened to me previously?" Klein pushed the cue stick forward and hit the ball, sending a red ball right into the middle pocket. Without a trace of politeness, he straightened his body and said, "Recently, everyone has been looking for the believers of the Fool. There are many bounties available. What news do you have?" Ian thought for a moment and said, "Nothing. I even suspect whether the Fool has any believers since no one can find any clues." "This is what you call blasting air with a cannon." Klein gave a silent, self-deprecating laugh before turning to ask, "In addition, there's another bounty. People are looking for a lecturer named Azek Eggers. I wish to know who was the one behind the bounty, so as to determine if I should involve myself in it." Searching for people is very time-consuming." Ian didn't directly answer, he surveyed his surroundings and lowered his voice. "Me 9. Me 9? It's not the Numinous Episcopate. It seems like it really was arranged by Ensanguil. He's trying to create conflict between Mr. Azek and MI9? Perhaps he knows some secret that he shouldn't be aware of?" A series of thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. Finally, he smiled and said, "Looks like I don't have to worry about the bounty being false, but I'm afraid that the circumstances as to why Azek Eggers is being pursued by MI9 is because he knows some secret. That being the case, the day I obtain the bounty might be the last day of my life." Ian spread his hands. "I'm not sure about that. But you can provide only clues." "Good suggestion." Without asking any more questions, Klein spent 5 solely, replenished some of his ordinary ammunition, and left the Bravehearts bar. He got on the rental carriage and looked out the window at the gloomy weather. Suddenly, he felt a little wistful. Casper's Kalinin is dead, which also means that Miss Sharon and Merrick will give up this base. With me only being able to contact them unilaterally, it'll be hard to find them. Unless they encounter some difficulties that require my help, or they have reached the stage of dealing with the evil spirit buried in the ruins. Otherwise, I'll likely not be meeting them again. Although they can't be considered friends, we've cooperated with each other twice. I could interact with them as a Beyonder without hiding my face. Now, there are 2 fewer people of such people. If it wasn't for the Desire Apostle, I would only have an oddity like the vampire, Emlyn White, who I can talk about mysticism with without any disguises. Thankfully. As he was sighing silently, an ethereal voice suddenly sounded in his ears. "Is there something?" Klein instantly shuddered, and only when he saw who was sitting in front of him did he heave a sigh of relief. He laughed in exasperation and said, "Miss Sharon, do you always appear all of a sudden like this?" Dressed in a gothic regal dress and a matching soft black hat, Sharon was sitting quietly on the other side of the carriage, her face as pale as ever. "I'll knock on the window next time." Sharon nodded without emotion. She didn't repeat the question, but she looked quietly at Klein in a reserved manner. "Knocking on the window all of a sudden? That's equally scary." Klein was in no hurry to mention the matter about the human-skinned shadow, and instead he asked, "Has the high sequence Beyonder left?" "Yes," Sharon said tersely. Klein was slightly relieved as he warned her, it could also be a trap. As he said this, he remembered something and quickly added, "I've finished reading the Book of Secrets, and I've obtained the corresponding information from other sources that praying to the primordial moon is prone to problems. It's best not to try." "All right." Sharon didn't ask why. She paused for a second and said in an ethereal voice, "The primordial moon and the chained god seem to be archenemies. Because they can switch sequences? Or could there be other reasons?" Klein thought as he directed the conversation to what really mattered. "Miss Sharon, do you know of any places with the characteristic of a human-skinned shadow?" Like a puppet, Sharon listened quietly before nodding her head. "Yes." "She knows?" Klein was overjoyed, and quickly asked, "Where?" In his heart, he was already prepared to pay the consultation fee. Sharon sat there without moving and said, like a talking doll, "In one of the gatherings that Merrick participated in, someone once discovered the tomb of an ancient noble. They explored the periphery but didn't dare to venture deep, but there were traces of human-skinned shadow activity. They hoped to recruit a team strong enough to completely explore the tomb and split the valuables equally. To seek help in a gathering of Beyonders who are not familiar with each other, how can all parties guarantee each other's credibility? What if there's no tomb at all, and it's just a trap?" Klein quickly thought and asked in response, "Did they succeed?" "Yes," Sharon answered simply. "This?" Klein temporarily didn't pursue the details. He suppressed his voice to avoid being overheard by the carriage driver. "And then?" "After that, they never appeared again," Sharon calmly recounted. "One of the members was a friend of Merrick's, and he disappeared completely after that matter." Without waiting for Klein to ask, she continued to speak with her ethereal voice. "Merrick found some of his friend's belongings. I used the method of divination to track them down to White Cliff Town, and I found a hidden entrance to the tomb at the riverbend of the Stratford River. Merrick's friend was inside, but he was already dead." "You went in?" Klein blurted out. "No, I determined it using another method," Sharon explained. "That tomb gave me a sense of great danger. I didn't try to explore it." At this point, she looked at Klein with her blue eyes. "Without the help of a sequence 4 Beyonder or a sealed artifact of a corresponding level, it would be best not to venture deep into that tomb. Even you find it very dangerous. I don't need to go above the gray fog to divine it to know how terrifying it is." Klein looked down at the floor of the carriage and thought for a few seconds. "Do you know which ancient noble's tomb it belongs to?" Sharon did not pause in her reply. "His last name is Amon." "Amon? A member of the family of that Amon who had possessed Little Son's body and almost sneaked into the mysterious space above the gray fog?" Klein used his ability as a clown to control the slight twitch of his eyelids. He asked in puzzlement, "Are you sure?" At this moment, a figure appeared in his mind, a black classic robe, a matching pointed hat, a broad forehead, a thin face, black eyes, black hair, and a crystal monocle. Sharon's pale blonde hair shone through the mist like an oil painting drawn by a master, and she said in her usual flat tone, "According to the items obtained from the initial exploration, a member of the gathering who specializes in ancient history determined that the owner of the tomb came from the Tudor dynasty of the 4th epoch. The family name is Amon. It really is the blasphemer family of the 4th epoch. This family isn't cursed like the Abraham family, nor was it destroyed directly by the church of a certain goddess like the Antigonus family. According to the special and powerful performance Amon showed in the City of Silver, the situation of this family might be comparable to that of Zeradal's. They were all secretly passed down, with the presence of high-sequence beyonders among their ranks, perhaps even with powerful angels. They protect certain crucial secrets, such as the coordinates of the forsaken land of the gods. The danger of a tomb left behind by such a family can be imagined. Perhaps Amon can borrow the power of certain changes to cast his gaze over from the distant forsaken land of the gods. I can't use the perspective of a low or mid-sequence beyonder to deduce the terror of a demigod. Klein didn't ponder for long before denying the possibility of exploring the tomb of the Amon family. Slightly disappointed, he looked up at Sharon. Is that place the only place with a human-skinned shadow? Sharon shook her head. No. Oh? Klein's eyes lit up, and he assumed a listening posture. Sharon said, her voice unchanged, I participated in a gathering. A beyonder promised that as long as someone completes a mission given by her, she would satisfy any reasonable request. When it comes to ingredients, it is limited to those below that of high-sequence beyonder ingredients. In other words, she can give any beyonder ingredient below that of high-sequence beyonders? The first thought that came to Klein's mind was, is she bragging? Even for the Church of the Evernight Goddess, only the Holy Cathedral, or in other words, the Cathedral of Serenity, would possess such a possibility. Many of these ingredients weren't commonly needed because they weren't needed at all. Upon hearing Klein's question, Sharon calmly replied, she's a high-sequence beyonder. High-sequence beyonder? No wonder. That would be on the level of the high-ranking members of the churches or secret organizations. Even if they don't belong to any party, they would still build up their own faction. However, the promise of any type of beyonder ingredient below a high-sequence potion definitely can't be completely met. Klein momentarily had such a thought. Sharon simply added, she said that certain ingredients would require a certain period of time. That's more like it. Klein asked with interest, what mission did she give? Sharon sat up straight and dignified. Investigate Hero Bandit Dark Emperor's true identity. Klein believed that if he had been drinking water at that moment, then he wouldn't have been able to control himself and that he would have sprayed it across from him. Who did I offend? Why am I the target of a high-sequence beyonder? He first lamented in Chinese, then he quickly analyzed the possible parties. Members of the Twilight Hermit Order? Because the Hero Bandit Dark Emperor had killed the Desire Apostle, Beria? Members of the Aurora Order? They drew links to the Fool from the tarot cards I left during the Capim incident, and they decided to investigate the Hero Bandit Dark Emperor? Members of the Three Churches and MI9? Just to find out the truth about the Capim affair? Every one of them is possible, and none of them can be ruled out. Klein didn't show any abnormalities as he deliberated and asked, why is she investigating the true identity of the Hero Bandit Dark Emperor? No one knows, Sharon replied in the simplest of terms. Klein thought for 2 seconds and said after organizing his words, what kind of person is she? I want to know if I should take this mission. Sharon remained silent for 2 seconds, seemingly in recollection. Then she described, female, above 1.70 meters tall, very well proportioned, chestnut hair, was disguised, loves black leather boots, only occasionally attended the gatherings, and first appeared 2 months ago. Loves wearing black leather boots, female, high-sequence beyonder. When these 3 keywords were put together, it immediately triggered a certain part of Klein's memories. Back when he went to the Royal Museum to steal the Dark Emperor card, he had met a mysterious high-sequence beyonder in the reconstructed study of Emperor Roselle. She only revealed her feet in black leather boots, and when he borrowed the power of the grey fog to escape, he ended up running into the devil dog due to the side effects of the master key and had to shout for help. Therefore, Klein Moriarty ended up meeting the female demigod again. Her? Why would she look for Hero Bandit Dark Emperor? She's confirmed that the thief who stole the card of blasphemy is a spirit body and knows what would happen if a spirit body carries and contains the Dark Emperor card. Hence, she has locked onto the Hero Bandit Dark Emperor who has similar traits? Klein quickly thought of a very convincing possibility. The only thing that confused him was how the other person Knew that he had taken the Dark Emperor card and not any other cards, such as the Abyss card or the Sun card. Unless she was targeting the card of blasphemy, and she had investigated beforehand that it was the Dark Emperor card. Well, Miss Sharon said that she joined the gathering for the first time more than 2 months ago. This matches the timing of Roselle's exhibition. Later, she occasionally participated without leaving Backland, or perhaps, she returned regularly to search for the enemy who had taken the Dark Emperor's card. Klein's thoughts blazed through his mind as he gave a faint smile. I'll keep an eye out for her. I hope there's something to be gained. She can forget about getting anything her entire life. He added inwardly without hesitation. Sharon nodded almost imperceptibly and said nothing more about the human-skinned shadow. Obviously, she only had 2 leads, but it was still better than the vampire Emlyn White and Eye of Wisdom Isengard Stanton's circle. Klein slowly exhaled, concealing his inward disappointment, and said with a respectful tone, "You and Merrick aren't troubled by the curse anymore, are you?" "There's only one scarlet lunar corona," Sharon answered calmly. The person who wore the scarlet lunar corona was immune to the full moon's effects, a dream item for mutants. That is to say, one will be fine, and one will be in the same situation as before. When affected by the full moon, Merrick will be driven to insanity, while Miss Sharon will lose her strength. It appears Merrick is the one using it. Klein thought as he changed topics. Have you found a way to remove a rampager's mental corruption on the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Wraith Steve? He casually asked this question without much hope. In his heart, he believed that there was a greater chance with the sun. No. Sharon appeared like she was talking about someone else. Perhaps I will sell you this method in the future and hope that you have saved up your gold pounds. Klein tersely acknowledged and was suddenly unsure of how to continue the conversation. He paused for a few seconds before asking, "Where is White Cliff Town?" "Backland suburbs, south of the bridge," Sharon answered succinctly. She looked into Klein's eyes again. "Nothing else?" "Nothing." Klein first shook his head, and then asked, "Can I tell others about the tomb?" "Sure." Sharon's figure rapidly faded before she disappeared from the carriage. Perhaps it was to conceal herself, as she never had the habit of using perfume, thus, leaving behind an empty environment once more. 8 p.m., Harvest Church. After changing back into his usual attire, Klein looked around once as he pressed down on the edge of his hat. Then, he walked into the hall and headed for Emlyn White, who was standing before 3 rows of candles on the right side of the hall. At the vampire's feet was a black suitcase, its surface was seemingly covered with a layer of a wall of spirituality. Upon sensing Detective Sherlock Moriarty coming in, Emlyn was first pleased before revealing an alarmed look. He bent down to grab his suitcase and took a few steps back, closing the gap he had with Father Utravsky, who was focused on praying. "Are you afraid that I'll rob you of the Beyonder ingredients?" Klein stopped 3 meters away, then he smiled and said, "Let me first verify if it's the 2 ingredients I need." Emlyn White ran his hand through his hair, lifted the leather case to his chest and undid the buckle. The wall of spirituality shattered as a result, turning into a light breeze that blew through the prayer hall. Klein, who had long activated his spirit vision, immediately saw bursts of strange and dazzling light. It was the spiritual radiance released by many Beyonder characteristics. There were 2 small boxes inside the suitcase. One was made of tin and had many patterns on it. It looked Spartan and heavy. The other was only a cardboard box. Holding the black leather suitcase in one hand, Emlyn opened the slightly tarnished silver-colored tin case. The item inside looked like a yellowish-brown peeled walnut with the grooves and ridges of a brain. Along with the flickering of the candle flame, its appearance constantly changed. Sometimes it would turn gray and appear wrinkled. At other times, it would turn dark brown and extremely smooth. The colors would interweave, outlining a featureless face. At the sight of it, Klein felt the power of the potion, which he had completely digested and assimilated, stir a little, like a magnet encountering an opposite pole. He was able to control his body with his clown powers as he suppressed the feeling of attraction. He knew deep down that the item was a genuine mutated pituitary gland of a 1,000-faced hunter. It seems like what Emperor Roselle speculated in his diary is possible, that high-sequence items of the same pathway would unconsciously draw low- and mid-sequence beyonders to them, with a tendency to draw them together. Although the thousand-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland is still very far from a high sequence and doesn't have that kind of special force of attraction, it contains enough beyonder characteristics. Moreover, I've digested the sequence 7 potion. When the person and ingredients are sufficiently close, such a phenomenon will appear. I didn't notice it before because, firstly, the corresponding beyonder ingredients are of low quality, and secondly, my own strength is lacking, and I wasn't of a high enough sequence. Right, every time I digested the potion, an illusory starry sky would appear around me. There were many resplendent lights within, and they would pull one another in an attempt to converge. This might be a scene of the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics of the same pathway, and the greater the quality, the stronger the pull. Then, will beyonder characteristics of similar pathways conform to this law? Klein's expression didn't change as he recalled the records in Roselle's diary, and combined with his 3 experiences of digesting potions, he was able to determine the existence of a certain law. Emlyn White glanced at him warily, quickly closed the tin box and opened the paper box next to it. The paper box was padded with thick cotton, and in the center of the box was a glass bottle that could hold 200 milliliters of liquid. The bottle was half empty, while the rest of it was filled with a viscous liquid that could change its color based on the change of light. Any other problems? Emlyn closed the paper box. Let me confirm once more. Klein took out a gold coin and let it spin between his fingers, as though it had a life of its own. Ding! The gold coin bounced up and fell down again, landing in Klein's palm. It was heads, indicating a positive response. Klein nodded slightly and took out stacks after stacks of notes from various pockets. They were in 10-pound, 5-pound, and 1-pound denominations. 1,450 pounds. Klein placed the pile of cash on a nearby piece of furniture. Retreat a few steps, no, 5 steps. Emlyn called out cautiously. Klein smiled, raised his hands, and took 5 steps back. Emlyn cautiously moved closer, checking to see if there was any blank paper in the stack of cash. After doing a slight count, he threw the leather suitcase in his hand towards Klein. Klein was startled, and with his agile moves, he accurately caught the suitcase. He was afraid that the blood of the thousand-faced hunter would seep out after the bottle shattered. And Emlyn White took the opportunity to collect the bills and quickly retreated to the side of Father Utravsky. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief and seriously check the amount and their authenticity. At the sight, Klein recalled the scene and suddenly felt ashamed. He and Emlyn had made a perfectly fine Church of Mother Earth Cathedral look like the scene of an arms or drugs trade. After confirming the condition of the 2 ingredients, Klein snapped his fingers, igniting a match he had specially separated in his clothes, and allowed the soaring red flames to envelop his body. When the flames descended back down, he had already disappeared. As he often met Emlyn White at the Harvest Church, he didn't mind if Father Utravsky found out that he was a beyonder who had helped him eliminate his dark personality. He even felt that this would give him some form of friendship. Emlyn, who was counting the money, looked up and was stunned for a good 2 seconds. He muttered to himself in a low voice, "My suitcase. My tin box." On the lamplit street, a carriage rolled over the puddles and headed for the edge of Empress Borough. Furs has told her good friend, Xiao Dari Cha, that she had a teacher and had ended up consuming another apprentice potion. After confirming that she didn't have any signs of losing control, Xiao looked outside the window at the gas lamps, which weren't much taller than she was, and asked in puzzlement, "I've always wondered why they're preserved as ingredients and not as a potion. Your teacher could have concocted the potion beforehand and brought them here, so there was no need for him to do it on the spot." Furs gave a faint smile and said, "I've asked him about this before. He said that there are 2 main reasons. One is that different beyonder ingredients have different uses, and when they're made into a potion, they cannot be used flexibly. The second is that when the beyonder characteristics are solidified, they can be kept forever, but after it becomes a potion, that won't be the case unless one uses a special isolation technique." "Why?" Xiao asked in surprise. This isn't an ordinary type of medicine or beyonder weapon in which its spirituality will continue to dissipate and weaken. Furs wasn't in the mood to laugh, but she had no choice but to maintain her smile. It's not a problem about the characteristic loss, but that once beyonder ingredients become potions, not only can humans absorb them, even other creatures or materials without life can. It's just relatively slower. For example, if I use a glass bottle to store the potion, it might appear fine, but after a few days, the glass bottle would finish drinking the potion, becoming a special mystical item. It might even gain intelligence. Of course, my teacher said that such a situation has very huge side effects, akin to what a rampager leaves behind. The 7 churches and some hidden factions have special isolation techniques, but it's rather troublesome, and they won't use it on low or mid-sequence potions. How amazing! Xiao sighed. She took another look outside and said in a low voice, "We're almost there." She and Furs were here to attend the Beyonder gathering which Mr. A was holding. Furs smiled while feeling her heart bleed. "I hope there's the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch." Her teacher, Dorian Gray, had taught her the acting method before he left. He even gave her the potion formula for Trickmaster and got her to attempt to find the Beyonder ingredients on her own. If she hadn't gathered all of the ingredients by the time she digested the apprentice potion, she could write to him for help. This left Furs in a rather lost state. Why did I spend large sums of money to purchase the Trickmaster formula and the acting method? Up to now, the greatest and invaluable help the Tarot Club has given me were the things Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice taught me to take note of, as well as Mr. Fool's interference in divination. Otherwise, teacher would have long discovered a problem with me, and I wouldn't have become his student. Sigh, I'll just consider it as the price for neutralizing the full moon's curse. As the thought crossed her mind, Furs suddenly noticed that the house where Mr. A had his gathering held had visibly collapsed, and there were even scorch marks in many places. There was a fierce battle here. Who dealt with Mr. A? An official organization? Furs immediately signaled to Xiao and instructed the carriage driver outside, "Not here, 2 more streets up ahead." Aurora orders base found. Terrorist organization suffers severe setback. The next day, Klein saw this article the moment he flipped the newspapers open. Let's hope Mr. A died in this ambush. He drew the crimson moon on his chest in solemnity. He had already thrown the 1,000-faced hunter's blood and mutated pituitary gland from last night above the gray fog to ensure that they wouldn't be lost. Even if I die, they won't be lost. Klein chewed on a piece of bacon with great ease. After last night's transaction, his cash reserves had fallen back below £1,000, leaving him with only £735, which was only enough to buy a deep-sea Naga's hair. After that, he didn't have the ability to purchase the human-skinned shadows characteristic. Without any better clues or money, Klein rested at home the entire morning. After lunch, he dressed up and headed straight for the Backland Bridge area. He had previously made an agreement with Carlson of the Machinery Hive Mine to find him at the Lucky Bar near the West Balham Dock if he had any intelligence. If the intelligence was especially important and Carlson wasn't there, he was to go straight to Lever Cathedral. After all, Sherlock Moriarty wasn't a member of a secret organization, so there was no need for caution. There weren't many customers at Lucky Bar in the afternoon, so Klein instantly saw Carlson sitting and drinking alone in a corner of the bar. He walked over, knocked on the table, and reported with a suppressed voice, "Many people in East Borough are spreading the faith of the original creator." Carlson sipped some alcohol brewed from pure malt and replied noncommittally, "I'm aware." As expected. Klein commented silently before smiling. "I have a clue regarding a 4th epic tomb of a noble." Ah. The glass in Carlson's hand paused as he looked at Klein in surprise, and he unconsciously nudged his thick glasses. But he noticed that Detective Sherlock Moriarty wasn't continuing to describe the matter, but looking at the bartender a few steps away while saying with a smile, "1 glass of Southville beer." Seeing the white foam of the Southville beer being placed in front of Sherlock Moriarty, Carlson finally came to his senses. It was only when the bartender was a certain distance away from them did he ask in a suppressed voice, "What do you want?" Klein picked up his glass and took a sip. He took a few seconds to savor the bitter taste of the malt and the faint sweetness from it. Cheers. He looked sideways at Carlson and smiled before raising his glass. Without hesitation, Carlson shook his head and refused the offer, mumbling, "You have beer, while I have strong distilled liquor. It's not suitable for a toast." Klein was only going through the motions, so he once again took a sip of his Southville beer, looked straight ahead, and chuckled. "What I want is very simple. I'm not sure what's inside the tomb, so I can only describe it rather vaguely. Well, I hope that I can choose an item from the spoils of your tomb exploration. I'm not greedy, and my request will not involve high-sequence items. I wouldn't dare to take it even if they were one of the options. If you find nothing or there are only high-sequence items, then I don't want anything. Of course, I believe that when the latter happens, you wouldn't be stingy with giving me a sum of cash that's consistent with my contribution." After hearing about the Amon family's tomb from Miss Sharon yesterday, he had came up with rough plans. The first plan was to blow the copper whistle, contact Mr. Azek, and join forces to explore the tomb. However, there were many potential problems with this plan. Firstly, he was unsure of the amount of strength Azek, who was still in the midst of finding his lost memories, had regained. Secondly, Azek was being pursued by MI9, so it was very easy for him and Azek to land in trouble. Thirdly, there was a high chance that Klein would end up reappearing in the sites of sealed artifact 0-08 once again. Of course, he could also consider using the help of the Grey Fog to make contact or embark on the expedition. However, blowing the copper whistle above the Grey Fog made it impossible to summon the messenger, therefore, ending all of his subsequent plans. More importantly, Klein didn't dare to reveal the secret of the space above the fog to Azek Eggers, whose identity remained a mystery. Therefore, he finally chose the second method, which was to use his identity as an informant to submit the information to the machinery hivemind and ask for a reasonable reward. When it came to the number of high-sequence Beyonders, which faction could have more than the 7 churches? According to what Klein knew, there were close to 10 high-sequence Beyonders in the Church of the Evernight Goddess. In other words, nearly half of the 13 archbishops and 9 high-ranking deacons had reached or surpassed sequence 4. This wasn't considering the adorer of the goddess, the Pope who helmed the church. Even if the situation regarding the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery was inferior in this aspect, it couldn't be that inferior. Their Archbishop of the Backland Diocese, Horamic Haydn, was a high-sequence Beyonder. And as such, for an Orthodox church, with all its resources accumulated to date, it wouldn't value the mid-sequence items very, very, very much. Klein believed that he could negotiate a reasonable price. Simply put, the core element of the second plan was, find an organization for any difficulties. Upon hearing Klein's offer, Carlson paused for a second, then blurted out, "Aren't you a believer in God?" "I've always had the goddess in my heart." Klein drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. "It is because of my belief in God that I've told you this information, not to the Nighthawks through Mr. Stanton. God said to let those who wish to be strong, be strong. Only by becoming stronger and having more money can I have more access to different channels and resources, and thus provide you with better and more effective information." In order to convince the machinery hivemind, he had specifically spent the morning reading through the Steam and Machinery Bible that he had bought earlier. He then found a few sentences from the deity that met his requirements and memorized them. Carlson was momentarily unable to provide a rejoinder. He just sat there, stunned, to the point of forgetting to drink. Seeing this, Klein quickly added, "Moreover, this will help you establish a harmonious and efficient relationship with new generation informants. As long as you spread the news of the rewards I receive as a result of this, as well as keeping your promise without going back on your word, then I believe that the other informants will be deeply moved and be greatly motivated to do their best to gather useful information for you. Of course, I wish that you use my pseudonym when advertising this." Carlson listened with a blank face, picked up his glass, and gulped down a mouthful. He almost choked. Cough. "Sherlock, the real you is completely different from what I remember about you from before." He sighed. The detective Sherlock Moriarty in his memories was good at analysis and reasoning. He was extremely calm and polite, and, with a great sense of justice, had offered very effective advice. He was an outstanding believer in God. Yet now, he was. Klein took a sip of his beer and chuckled. Everyone has their different sides. Using a single facade to face everything is prone to error. This is a problem you have to pay attention to when making deductions. After calming down for a moment, Carlson stood up and said, I have no right to agree to such a request. I will report it immediately, so wait here for a while. All right. Klein waved to the bartender and added a serving of potato wedges. By the time he leisurely finished his food and beer, Carlson returned to the bar with the deacon of the machinery hive mind, Xianxia Bernard. Xianxia looked around, and seeing that there was no one around, he said in a deep voice, There's no problem with your request, but there's one condition to add on, items with strong side effects and curses are not among the items available for selection. What I want is an ingredient. Klein immediately laughed. All right. Dare I ask again if is this your personal decision or the response from the higher-ups? I have the right to make such a decision. Xianxia used his hat to press down on his fluffy hair. But since it concerns an aristocratic tomb from the 4th epoch, I had sent a telegram to the Archbishop, and he didn't object to it in his reply. All right. Klein drew another triangular sacred emblem on his chest. I'll give you the information now. Xianxia shook his head subconsciously. He looked around and pointed to a billiard room. Let's talk inside. This deacon, who is always publicly placed on trial by the mirror called Aurora Reads, is quite experienced. Klein murmured and followed Xianxia and Carlson into the billiard room while making sure that the adjacent rooms were empty. Klein paused for a few seconds and said with some deliberation, The thing is, there was a beyonder who found a hidden tomb at the mouth of the Stratford River in Whitecliff Town. He searched the periphery and found some items. After that, they recruited people and did further explorations, but no one returned. If you search carefully over there, you will definitely find the corresponding traces. After listening carefully, Xianxia asked, Are you sure it's an aristocratic tomb from the 4th epoch? The items on the outside can prove that they're members of the Tudor dynasty's Amon family, Klein answered truthfully. He then warned him, the beyonders who died in there weren't weak at all, and there were quite a few of them. I believe that this tomb isn't something that can be explored by those below high sequence beyonders. Amon. Xianxia frowned instinctively. It could be seen that, as a deacon, he had the authority to know some ancient secret history. Without waiting for Klein to emphasize it again, he looked up and said, We will collect the relevant information first before we act. A 4th epoch aristocratic tomb is very dangerous. Don't tell this information to anyone else, or explore it yourself. Otherwise, you and your friends will only lose their lives. If I dared, I wouldn't be sitting here. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh and said, My reputation has always been good. After making the deal, he watched Xianxia and Carlson leave before putting on his hat and sauntering out of Lucky Bar. Towards the nobles of the 4th epoch, as well as the Amon family, the machinery hive mind will still be very cautious. They'll have to have at least several days of preparing before they take action. Prudence. Klein's random thoughts froze on a single word. He thought of another thing that could be described as being prudent. After Roselle had joined the ancient organization suspected of being the Twilight Hermit Order, he had actually never mentioned its name in his own secret diary, which was written in Chinese. Each time, he would refer to it by referring to it with the appropriate characteristics. This level of prudence was a very suspicious phenomenon. Why didn't Emperor Roselle dare to mention the name of that organization, even when it's written in Chinese? This is completely different from the style of writing where he dared to write anything in his diary. What was he afraid of, or what was he worried about? Could it be that as long as he said or wrote down the name of the Twilight Hermit Order, then they would be made aware of it at no matter which language he used? Does one of their members or a sealed artifact they possess have such abilities? A guess popped up in Klein's mind, but there was no way to confirm it unless he was willing to take the risk. I'll first assume it's true and that I haven't been perceived by them, because the channeling of the Desire Apostle's spirit had been done above the grey fog. Informing Miss Justice of it was also done in response to a prayer using the grey fog. Well, it's almost Monday, and I have to remind Miss Justice at the Tarot Club not to say or write down the name Twilight Hermit Order. As for the reason, she can understand it by herself with me simply giving her a look. Klein quickly made his next arrangements and strode out of Lucky Bar. Seeing that it was still early, he took a horse carriage to the Quelag Club, intending to spend the afternoon there. As soon as he entered the hall, he saw the equestrian teacher, Talum Dumont. This descendant of blue blood was seated in a corner, holding a glass of scarlet grape wine. His face was rosy, and he was sipping it in high spirits. "You seem to be in a good mood, Talum," Klein smiled and greeted him. Talum chuckled and said, "Because the new year is coming." Then, rather excitedly, he asked, "Sherlock, do you know what it's like to really like someone?" Klein showed a fake smile. "I'm sorry, I'm still single." Talum finished the rest of his wine, stood up, waved his hand, and said, "That's a pity. Well, I have to get busy. By the way, thank you for introducing Mr. From's cage." Klein recalled the investment of the bike project and sincerely expressed his gratitude. "When are you free these days? I'd like to get you to bring me around to sample some of Backlund's delicacies." "After the new year." Talum put on his hat and walked with a smile to the reception hall. "Has this fellow entered the season of love?" Klein couldn't help but mutter. Just as he turned around and took a few steps, he suddenly heard a heavy thud. Klein jerked his head back and saw Talum Dumont on the ground, his left hand clamped tightly at his chest where his heart was. His body was convulsing non-stop. "This?" Klein hurried over. But at this moment, Talum had already spat out all of the white foam on his mouth, losing his last breath of life. In just a few seconds, he had turned into a dead corpse. This wasn't the first time Klein had seen someone familiar die in front of him, but it was the most abrupt and unforeseen death. The expression on Talum Dumont's face when he had asked about what it felt to really like someone was a vivid expression of hidden excitement and flaunting, but one which couldn't be directly shared due to the need of being careful as a result of certain factors. That was too fast. Normal diseases do not cause death so quickly. Klein's expression was solemn as he lightly tapped his molars to activate his spirit vision. He dropped to one knee and crouched down. He saw Talum Dumont's aura and the colors of his emotions fading rapidly. Furthermore, there were strands of black gas wrapped around his heart like a snake which were gradually dimming. A beyonder ability similar to a curse? Klein instantly made a preliminary conclusion. At this moment, a nearby red-vested attendant and a servant girl in a black and white dress ran over. They looked at the dead body on the ground in horror. His eyes were wide and round, and the corners of his mouth still had remnant white foam. Klein closed his eyes and instructed in a deep voice, "Go to the nearby police station and tell them someone died here." "Yes, Mr. Moriarty." The red-vested attendant immediately turned around and ran out the door, so flustered that he even forgot to put on his coat. Under the watchful gaze of the crowd, Klein didn't check Talum's belongings, nor did he try to pull out a few strands of hair for a divination attempt when he wasn't around anyone. His identity was already considered semi-official, so he could use the power of the machinery hive mind to conduct a follow-up investigation. There was no need for him to act as a lone hero. Thinking of the many times he had played cards with Talum Dumont, and how he had introduced clients and investors, and the love story that had been hanging in his mind for so long, Klein couldn't help but take a long, slow, deep breath. Who's Talum's murderer? Which beyonder, who's adept at curses, did Talum offend? Judging from his attitude today, he should be in a very happy and calm state, completely unaware of the fact that he has provoked a terrifying character. Questions flashed through Klein's mind, but his lack of understanding about Talum Dumont resulted in a lack of soil to nurture any inspiration. When the police arrived, he was questioned as a witness and that wasted quite a bit of his time. It wasn't until all of this was over that Klein had a chance to leave Hillston Borough and head back to Lucky Bar in the Backlund Bridge area. Carlson was still there drinking, the only difference being that his drink had been exchanged from a strong distilled liquor made from pure malt to golden, frothy beer. Klein raised his right hand, covered his mouth, and squeezed over. He lightly knocked on the table and said, "Is your job to drink here every day?" Carlson jumped in fright as he turned his head, relaxing only when he saw that it was Sherlock Moriarty. "You. What is it now?" "This reaction is very familiar." Klein sighed silently and said gravely, "There is a case involving Beyonders." Carlson looked around and saw that Lucky Bar already had quite a number of patrons. They were either hollering over their glasses or eager to fight in the ring. "Follow me, let's play a round of billiards." Carlson nudged his thick glasses and carried his beer to an empty billiard room. Klein followed, closing the door behind him. "Your alcohol tolerance seems pretty good," he said in passing. "No, I just drink very slowly." Carlson put down his glass and picked up the cue stick. Then, he added inexplicably, "And I'd like some alone time lately." "I don't care about that." Klein pursed his lips and said, "I encountered a death at the Quelag Club in Helstonborough. That was a friend of mine, a noble descendant, and an equestrian teacher. He's usually healthy and had recently been in a very good mental state, but just now, he suddenly died in front of me. It looked like a heart attack, but my spirit vision told me that he might have been cursed." "You're adept at spirit vision?" Carlson asked subconsciously. "What sort of details did Mr. Stanton fabricate for me?" After becoming a machinery hivemind informant, they never even asked me which pathway I was, or which sequence I met, nor did they try to find out about my origins and background. Of course, letting an informant keep certain secrets of their own is also a common tactic used by official organizations. Klein frankly responded, "Yes, the chest of the deceased had some decaying, illusory black gas. It does involve the possibility of a curse and a beyonder." Carlson didn't ask further as he slowly nodded. "Helstonborough. That's the territory of our machinery hivemind. In the northwest of Backland, which was the heart of the metropolis, Empress Borough and Sherwood Backland came under the mandated Punisher's jurisdiction. The western and northern areas came under the Nighthawks, and Helstonborough and Backland Bridge area came under the machinery hivemind." Having said this, Carlson looked at Klein and attempted to confirm the details. "What deity does your friend believe in?" After thinking carefully for a few seconds, Klein replied hesitantly, "The Lord of Storms." "A believer of the Lord of Storms. Is he the only deceased?" Carlson asked with a frown. "Yes," Klein gave an affirmative answer. Carlson chalked the cue stick and sighed. "We have no right to take the case. This is under the mandated Punishers. But I will pass on your information to them." In the Lone Kingdom, the principle of jurisdiction over beyonder events was first to divide them according to their beliefs. If they involved the followers of multiple deities, then it would be decided according to who held jurisdiction over the area. Klein was no stranger to this. He had no intention of making things difficult for Carlson, so he earnestly said, "Thank you. I hope they can find the real killer as soon as possible." Carlson picked up the glass of beer beside him and took a sip. "He's a descendant of blue blood. The mandated Punishers will definitely take it seriously." Pausing for a second, he looked at Klein and said in a low voice, "I find it hard to believe that you've only been in Backland for about 3 months. You seem to have established a wide range of social connections and possess lots of resources here. Some people are naturally adept at this." Klein shook his head with a self-deprecating laugh before bidding farewell. By the time he got back to Minsk Street, it was completely dark and the gas lamps lining the streets were being lit by workers. Although his relationship with Talum Dumont didn't go deep, he was an acquaintance he met nearly every week. He was a friend he would play cards with every now and then, and Talum was rather warm and had always exalted him as a great detective. Furthermore, he had practiced what he preached by introducing clients and investors. His passing also made Klein feel sad, making him fully aware of his helplessness towards fate. Other than that, he was also very angry. He was angry at the murderer who had cursed Talum to death. "I hope that they can figure out what happened. I hope that the mandated punishers doesn't run out of manpower because of Duke Negan's assassination case. Klein sighed as he got off the carriage and walked towards the gate. In the process, he discovered that there was no light at the Sammers house next door. It looks like they're on their way to Desi Bay. Is this the New Year atmosphere in Backland? Yet, I don't feel anything at all. Klein momentarily felt melancholic. With these emotions in mind, he went to bed early and woke up at 7 in the morning. In an attempt to change his mood, Klein decided to bake a homemade cake today. I'll buy the ingredients after breakfast, he whispered, drinking his milk and flipping through the newspapers. Soon, he saw an obituary in the Tussock Times. My beloved son, Talon Dumont, passed away on December 18 due to a sudden heart disease. His funeral will be held at the Crown Cemetery at exactly 9 a.m. on December 21. In the northern continent, due to reanimations, it was already an ancient tradition to be buried as quickly as possible after one's death. Of course, this was on the premise that there was no shortage of money for a funeral. Sudden heart disease? Is this the final result of the investigation? Or could it be that the mandated punishers are trying to lull the culprit? Klein frowned, unable to make a judgment. Perhaps I can go above the gray fog to see if it's a trap set up by the mandated punishers, but there's a high probability of failure. After all, I don't have one of his items with me, nor was I targeted. He took a breath, calmed down, and methodically filled his stomach. The subsequent attempt didn't exceed Klein's expectations. He could only leave Minsk Street and take a bus to Hillston Borough to visit Isengard Stanton. The great detective walked in the warm room, pointed to the front, and said, "Sherlock, would you like some breakfast? My chef's skills aren't worse than mine." "No, I've already had breakfast." Klein shook his head and declined. Isengard stopped in his tracks and casually asked, "Where are you going to spend the New Year's?" "I'm planning on, returning to Lemberg. I haven't confirmed it yet." "Perhaps mid-seashire," Klein said, perfunctorily. The scenery there was originally pretty good, but unfortunately, there's an abundance in coal and iron resources. There was also a rather developed shipping industry. Isengard straightened his collar and touched the pipe in his pocket. "You seem to be a little anxious?" "Mr. Stanton, I have something to ask you." Klein took the opportunity when asked the question to relate, in detail, Talon Dumont's death, the results of his spirit vision, his advice to the machinery hive mind, and what he had seen in this morning's obituary. Of course, he had hidden the fact that he had become an informant for the machinery hive mind. He only said that for his friend, he had found an official beyonder he got to know due to the Desire Apostle case. "Do you think this is a trap by the mandated punishers?" he finally asked. Holding the pipe, Isengard said thoughtfully, "I've been trying to avoid the mandated punishers, and I don't know enough about the situation. I'll get someone to find out. If there's any news, then I'll write to you." "Okay, thank you." Klein bowed sincerely. In the evening, he received a letter specially sent from Isengard. There was only one sentence in the letter: "This case isn't handled by the mandated punishers. The royal family has taken the case by claiming that Talon Dumont is a noble." The royal family. Klein held the letter he received from Isengard Stanton and silently murmured to himself. He looked up and outside the window, and he saw the rain pattering down. The gas lamps on the streets were giving off quiet halos. Inside the living room, the coffee table was neat and tidy, with a few stacks of newspapers placed in the corner. There was silence all around him. Klein sat on the sofa as he leaned forward a little. He sat there silently for a long time. After nearly 10 minutes, he exhaled and shook his head. Slowly and heavily, he tossed the letter into the trash can. He slowly stood up and expressionlessly walked to the second floor. And in the trash can, Isengard Stanton's letter caught fire silently and quickly crumpled into black ashes. On Monday morning, Klein stood in front of the mirror, pressed his right thumb and middle finger to his temples, and rubbed them with a little more strength. When he was done, he turned on the faucet, lowered his body, splashed the cold tap water onto his face, and washed his face while having a fit at the cold. After freshening himself up, he hung up the towel, walked to the first floor, and simply made a single-sided, well-done fried eggs with buttered toast. Of course, a cup of black tea with a few slices of lemon quenched his thirst and reduced the cloy sensation he was feeling. After breakfast, as he was idly flipping through the rest of the newspapers, Klein suddenly heard the tinkling of the doorbell. Who is it? A new commission? Could it be that the machinery hive mind has already finished exploring the Amon family's tomb? No, it can't be that fast. Klein muttered as he put away his napkin and newspapers and walked slowly to the door. When he held the handle, the image of the visitor outside the door appeared in his mind. It was an elderly gentleman dressed to a T. His snow-white shirt was starched, and a thick grayish-blue vest completely hid his belly. The long tailcoat had sharp lines without any blemishes on it. The gentleman was wearing a pair of shiny leather shoes, so shiny that it was impossible to tell if he had walked through the rain or mud. He wore a pair of white knitted gloves, with silver hair at his temples. His face was deeply wrinkled, and his light brown eyes were so serious that they didn't contain a hint of a smile. I don't know him. Klein mumbled and opened the door. May I know who you're looking for? He asked politely. The elderly gentleman took off his hat, pressed it to his chest, and saluted in the most standard manner. Mr. Sherlock Moriarty, I'm a butler who has come to invite you in place of my master. Do I know your esteemed master? Why is he looking for me? Klein's head was completely filled with questions. But at this moment, he had already noticed a carriage parked across the cement road. It had a deep black outer shell, and there was a curtain on the inside of the window. It was obvious that it was nothing ordinary. There's luxury amidst being low-key. Klein looked closely and suddenly saw that there was a coat of arms in a conspicuous part of the carriage. The main body of the coat of arms was a vertical sword facing down, and the hilt of the sword had a red crown. That's the Sword of Judgment. It's the Sword of Judgment representing the Royal Augustus family. Klein's heart palpitated as he roughly understood the butler's background. Perhaps he's a rather powerful beyonder. Klein made a guess. The professional and stern butler didn't pay attention to his scrutiny. He revealed a polite smile and said, You have never met my master, but in a sense, you do know him. You have been providing him clues about the organization that is symbolized by the tarot cards, and he has paid for the money you need. As expected, it's the important figure that Talum mentioned. I've been using false information to fleece for funds and even submitted all the reimbursements that old Kohler required to him. I can't refuse his invitation now, especially when Talum is dead. Klein pondered for 2 seconds and said, Did your master come to me due to Talum's death? Yes, Talum was his friend. He was sad and confused by his death, and he heard that you were there when it happened, the old butler articulated clearly. No, I wasn't. Klein subconsciously wanted to deny it, but he ultimately could only nod. Yes, I saw Talum die in front of me. It's really a sad and regretful thing, the butler said in a sincere tone. Are you willing to accept my master's invitation? Do I have any reason to refuse? That would just make me look very suspicious. I might even be killed on the spot by you. Klein looked at him and said, I happen to have nothing planned this morning. All right then. Mr. Moriarty, please. The old butler bent down slightly, extended his right white-gloved hand, and pointed at the carriage on the opposite side of the cement road. Sigh, I've been trying to avoid getting involved with important figures. In the end, I have no choice but to face the person behind Talum after his death. I wonder if this would attract attention or lead to more in-depth background checks. I have to plan ahead and be ready to give up my identity and this foothold at any time. Also, I need to get the human-skinned shadow characteristic and the deep-sea Naga's hair and advance to faceless as soon as possible. In that case, my ability to resist risks would more than double. When Klein put on his coat and hat and walked to the carriage with the royal coat of arms, he had already thought of the subsequent developments. At this moment, the servant the old butler brought with him opened the door for him. Stepping on the thick brown carpet, Klein looked at the wooden cabinets containing red wine, white wine, champagne, lanty, and black rand, along with the crystal glasses. Klein felt rather restricted as he sat by the window. Lanty referred to strong distilled spirits made from pure malt. There were many types, such as the sailor's favorite Lanty proof. The bottles displayed in the cabinets were obviously of high quality. As for Black Rand, they referred to strong distilled wines mixed with other fermented grains, which, like Lanty, was something unique to Lone. As the carriage drove through the wet streets, Klein asked in passing, "Are we going to Empress Borough?" "No, my master is waiting for you at the Red Rose Manor on the outskirts of Empress Borough." The old butler didn't hide anything. "Looks like this is the royal family's manor." Klein thought for a moment, then he asked with a smile, "Can you tell me your master's identity now?" The old housekeeper's back, which was already straight, became even straighter as he raised his chin. "He is the descendant of the founder and protector. He's the grandson of the Might Wielder, the fifth son of His Majesty, Duke of Lastings, His Highness Prince Edisac Augustus. So it's the third prince, the second youngest prince, but he should be around 21 to 22 years old." Klein recalled what he had seen in the occasional descriptions in the newspapers and magazines at the Quelag Club. The horse carriage passed through one street after another, going from an artificial lake to the northwest. After more than an hour, they finally arrived at an extremely large manor. At the entrance to the manor, Klein was inspected by two soldiers in red military uniforms and white trousers. He didn't hide the existence of his gun holster and revolver. He believed that there were definitely people around Prince Edisac who could tell that he was carrying a gun, and that it easily made things worse if he fooled them with illusions. "In any case, the prince knows that I'm a private detective, so his subordinates definitely wouldn't send guests to the police station just because I was illegally in possession of a gun." Klein watched as the soldier took the gun holster and revolver before he was informed to take it when he came out. After two more inspections, Klein followed the old butler, went around the main house, and came to a wide area with hills and flowing waters. The only drawback of this place was that the vegetation had long since withered away in the dead of winter, leaving nothing but desolation. Tap. 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 Several horses came running from the distance and stopped in front of him. A young man in white trousers, high-heeled black boots, a fitted shirt, and a dark rider's tunic nimbly dismounted and walked over. Everyone else followed closely by his side. He removed his helmet from his head and smiled at Klein. "I'm finally meeting you, Detective Moriarty." Upon seeing this, Klein's eyes lit up. It wasn't because of how handsome he was, but because he looked like the Henry Augustus I imprinted on 5-pound notes. Edisac Augustus also had a rotund face and a pair of slender eyes, but he didn't look serious at all. Instead, he always had a smile on his face, looking young and spirited. "I didn't know that you, Your Highness, were the one who entrusted me with the task." Klein bowed. Holding a horsewhip in his hand, Edisac weighed it in his palm and chuckled. "I heard that you played an important role in the serial killer and Desire Apostle cases." Talam's recommendation was indeed good. Sigh, who knew that he would be gone days after I was horse racing with him. "He has gone to the kingdom of storm and lightning." Since the founding of the kingdom, the Augustus family had always believed in the Lord of the Storms. Without waiting for Klein to answer, he said with a heavy expression, "The investigation into Talam's death didn't go through me, Mr. Moriarty. I want you to help me discover the truth." "The conclusion given by the rest of the royal family? Your two elder brothers? This sudden level of infighting isn't something I can handle. Also, Your Highness, your style is really direct." Klein sighed. "I'm sorry, but I'd still say that Talam died of a sudden heart disease." "Is that so?" News came from the mandated punishers that a detective by the name of Sherlock Moriarty had testified that Talam had signs of suffering from a curse. Prince Edisac chuckled. Klein could only respond with a wry smile. "Your Highness, you should know the principles I adhere to. I still wish to live another 50 years. "Wasn't Talam your friend?" Prince Edisac asked. Klein was at a loss for an answer when a maid suddenly came from the main room, quickly approached the prince, and whispered a few words. Edisac's face stiffened. "Tell her that she's not to go out." After he finished speaking, he took 2 steps forward. His serious expression softened, and a hint of softness and helplessness appeared in his blue eyes. But I will permit her to leave the room and walk around freely in the manor. The scene before his eyes reminded Klein of the romance story which Talem Dumont had told him. His noble friend had fallen in love with a commoner woman and was insistent on marrying her. However, being in the top circle of the aristocracy, the marriage was absolutely prohibited. Talem had been vexed over this matter, and he had even considered the prospect of hiring a murderer, but in the end, he managed to persuade the woman to leave his friend on her own accord. Could the main character of this story be Edisac Augustus? The situation is very consistent in all aspects. As a prince, marrying a commoner is practically treason in this era. Since the founding of Loan, the spouse of a direct descendant of the Augustus family could only be a noble woman. From what I've just heard, Edisac has brought that commoner woman back. And he has even grounded her as punishment? True love. In a split second, the story of a tyrannical prince and a pitiful frail white flower took shape in Klein's mind. He looked into the distance, enjoying the midwinter scenery. That's not what it really looks like. When spring comes and the grass sprouts, you'll see a golf course of the highest quality. Prince Edisac dismissed the maid, raised his whip, and pointed around. Golf? Klein asked, simultaneously knowing the answer to his question. Prince Edisac motioned his guards and attendants away, leaving the old butler and Klein to follow him by his side. He strolled on the desolate plains, chuckled, and said, "Yes, golf. This is a truly aristocratic sport that even the owners of most magazines and newspapers have a hard time getting involved in." Although I don't like Roselle, I have to admit that the fantasy-like ideas he had have given us a world with plenty of fun. If you can figure out the truth to Talem's death, this place will always be open to you. It was indeed Roselle. Klein let out a light breath. Seeing that he didn't respond, Prince Edisac continued to lament. There is much to learn from Roselle in every way, but his attitude towards feelings makes me sick. Of course, this is the common nature and style of most of the Intis aristocrats, and it's also the source of their infatuation with luxury and debauchery in their lives. Looking ahead at the slow stream, Edisac said in a mature tone that was beyond his years, 99% of people are not geniuses like Roselle. In order to succeed and establish a great enterprise, one must first understand what they really want, and for that, they must be willing to pay the price and never turn back while persisting all the way. As he said this, his tone became slow as he laughed at himself and said, "Before this year, I had always thought that I liked the daughter of Earl Hall very much. She has perfect looks, an elegant demeanor, a rich fortune, a distinguished family, and a very powerful father. She's someone that no prince can find fault with, but now I understand that what I'm really attracted to is something that I yearn to have even in my dreams. It's a unique temperament and profound soul born from experience." I'm not saying that Miss Hall is lacking in temperament, but that wasn't what I want, admire, or like. Your Highness, your tone, attitude, and expression are now almost identical to Talem just before he died. Don't suddenly die in front of me. Even if I were to jump into the Tussock River, there's no way for me to prove my innocence. Moreover, hearing much of this makes it easier for me to be silenced. Do you want to tie me to your chariot? Klein felt a little afraid for some baffling reason. He cleared his throat and took the initiative to change the subject. Your Highness, with your status and identity, you will certainly not lack subordinates. There are many people who are willing to investigate Talem's death for you, so why do you need me? Edisac shook his head and chuckled. As a prince, I have as much power as the little freedom I have. There are many things I can't let the people around me do, as there are too many eyes on me. You're a great detective with brains, and you have a good relationship with Talem. You were there at the time, so I don't think there's anyone better suited than you. Don't worry, if there really is a problem, then I can definitely guarantee your safety. Such a promise is like toilet paper in the bathroom. Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. With Prince Edisac already saying this much, he felt that there was little chance of him leaving Red Rose Manor if he refused again. He could only sigh and say, "Actually, I'm as angry as you are about Talem's death, but reality has kept me calm." Edisac smiled. "What can I do for you?" Talem's hair, either his flesh and blood, plus something he carried around with him. Klein made the request. Okay, then I'll have these delivered to your house. Edisek agreed at once, and then asked curiously, that's all? Klein didn't stand on ceremony. I will only know what kind of help I need when I have a preliminary lead. Your Highness, it's best that you give me a way to communicate with you. A private detective who frequently visits this manor would definitely arouse suspicion. Edisek nodded and said as if he was prepared, I'll have someone secretly rent the house next door to you, 13 Minsk Street. When you need to make contact, write a letter to your neighbor about visiting and put it in the mailbox. As for the reward, you should know that I'm not a stingy person, even if it ends in failure. As long as you contribute and take the risk, you will still receive the corresponding income. If you do find out the truth, I'll give you a reward sufficient for your retirement. This prince does things really swiftly and decisively. Retirement, that would be at least 3,000 pounds. Klein secretly sighed. Alright, may the spirit of Talem be at peace in the kingdom of storm and lightning. He bowed. Edisek nodded slightly and instructed his elderly butler, take Detective Moriarty out and back to Minsk Street. Why don't you keep me for lunch? Aren't you treating your guest in a little too arrogant a manner? Of course, it probably has to do with it being a long time before noon. Klein silently teased him. He followed the old butler all the way out to the entrance of the manor and retrieved the gun holster, revolver, and the bullets. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein stood at the oriel window and watched the carriage with the royal coat of arms drive away. Sherlock Moriarty might die at any moment if the investigations really goes deeper. Who knows, someone might be watching me right now. Not for now, since I haven't made any moves yet. Klein frowned and stood still. At this moment, he was extremely eager to advance to Faceless. I can't afford to wait for the machinery hivemind's exploration of the Amon family's tomb. I have to continue trying to buy the human-skinned shadow characteristic via other channels. After all, no one knows how long the machinery hivemind's preparations will take. What if it exceeds a month or even half a year? That's not impossible. They can first send people to guard the entrance and slowly gather the corresponding information so as to be certain that nothing goes wrong. It's not a bad strategy, but that's not something that I can afford to wait for. As thoughts raced through Klein's mind, he made his decision. At 2:45 p.m., he brought his newspaper into the bathroom and actively prepared for this week's tarot gathering. 3 o'clock sharp. A deep red illusory radiance rose as Audrey Hall looked around in a good mood. Last night, she had finally received the Sequence 7 psychiatrist potion formula she had been dreaming of. Her emotions were still a mix of excitement, agitation, and serenity. Furthermore, the psychology alchemists hadn't immediately asked her to make any contributions, claiming that it was an advance. They had full confidence in Miss Audrey's outstanding ability to repay them. No new members. Audrey stood up and gazed at the very end of the long bronze table. She raised the corners of her skirt and bowed. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool, good afternoon. Her light and cheerful voice broke the unchanging silence above the fog, and it allowed Klein, who had been feeling a little depressed, to temporarily be rid of the troubles that the outside world had on him. He nodded slightly and responded to the members' greetings. When she sat down again, Audrey brought the other members into view and created a dynamic scene with the previous observations. When bowing, Mr. Hanged Man silently sized up Mr. Fool with inconspicuous curiosity. Then, he looked towards Mr. World in anticipation. In other words, with him having a deep relationship with the Church of the Lord of Storms, he knows about the details of Duke Negan's assassination and is aware of the appearance of hero bandit Dark Emperor. He has the desire to investigate the hidden truth behind this matter. There appears to be an outcome regarding the werewolf beyonder characteristic which Mr. World had entrusted him to sell, and he has also probably found the human-skinned shadow characteristics or the deep-sea Naga's hair. The son's emotions are very stable and relaxed. This means that he believes that the City of Silver surveillance on him has been lifted. What did he rely on to make this judgment? Has he been reallocated to the so-called exploratory teams? Furs is a little depressed despite feeling relaxed. She passed the Abraham family member's test and has become his student, but she was forced to accept something that was disadvantageous to her. Mr. World is as cold and deep as ever. Perhaps when I reach sequence 7 or 6, I'll be able to grasp his emotional changes and thoughts. Well, the Fool is still as mysterious, powerful, and unfathomable. A series of thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind. She looked at the figure shrouded in the grey fog and said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have obtained 3 new pages of Roselle's diary." It was a copy she had requested from the psychology alchemists. However, as she had only mentioned it last night, Escalante only had the time to give her 3 pages in such short notice. "What kind of reward do you want?" Klein asked with a smile. Audrey replied sincerely, "Can you just treat it as the reward for answering my previous question?" As she said this, she had an inexplicable feeling of flaunting herself. "Mr. Hanged Man and the rest of you still don't know the existence of the Twilight Hermit Order. Phew, how envious. I wonder what problem did Miss Justice seek guidance for in private. I'll write to teacher when I get back, and I'll ask him if he has Roselle's diary, no, to the outside world, notebook." Furs immediately had the desire and motivation. Under the Hanged Man's suspicious gaze, Klein nodded without any care. "Sure." Audrey quickly produced 3 pages of tawny diary entries and passed them on to Mr. Fool. Klein took them and read them. On the first page, it wrote, "January 13th, contact with Mr. Door stabilized." This is a Chinese proverb, which involves jumping into the Yellow River. Just as Klein picked up the diary, Audrey added, "Mr. Fool, I still have 10 diary pages which will be given to you later. It is for the payment for your previous blessing." She repeated her private promise so as to not let Mr. Fool think that she had forgotten about it, and the reason why she had provided payment for the information regarding the Twilight Hermit Order was to first settle the debt while having the intention to show off a little. The payment for the blessing. Furs ruminated over these words and suddenly realized an important oversight on her part. On the matter regarding the Abraham family, Mr. Fool had sent his angel to help me interfere with the divination. I should have paid an appropriate amount. Oh no, I didn't realize this at all. I thought, like all rituals, that it was the end to it once it was completed. For a moment, Furs fell into a panic. During ordinary ritualistic magic, if one prayed for help from a deity or a corresponding existence, they would perform a sacrifice in advance. Burning essential oils, extracts, and herbal essence that pleased the target was equivalent to making an advanced payment, but in the rituals corresponding to the Fool, there were many steps that could be omitted, and the price could only be paid afterward. Sometimes, there wasn't even a need to offer anything. Furs, who was accustomed to the former, ended up only saying a word of thanks. She hurriedly looked towards the end of the long bronze table and earnestly said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, your divination interference had helped me greatly. I will try to find 10 Roselle diary pages as soon as possible as well." Seeing the performance of Miss Justice and Miss Magician, it dawned on Derek Berg that he had found a way to fully express his gratitude. However, the City of Silver doesn't have the diary pages of the so-called Emperor Roselle. Well, Mr. Fool is very interested in history, so I'll have to read more books and records on these. With a thought, Derek made a promise to Mr. Fool who sat high above him. The Hanged Man watched all this from the side and had no doubt that the Fool had an angel at his service. Any organization should have a character like Miss Justice. The power of a role model is limitless. With a lot of debts to collect appearing out of thin air, Klein happily sighed inwardly. As the high and mighty Mr. Fool, he always found it awkward to directly ask for compensation, and he had always believed that helping the members of his own organization was a normal and reasonable thing to do, without the need for him to make it so reliant on transactions. Thus, he didn't control the world to put on the appropriate performance to remind everyone. Of course, if Justice and the others were willing to provide payment, then Klein had no intention of refusing it. All right. He smiled and nodded before shifting his gaze back to the diary in his hands. January 13th, contact with Mr. Door stabilized. The powerful Beyonder, who's lost in the darkness and trapped in the storm, didn't rush me to complete a complicated and difficult ritual so as to help him return to the real world. He seems to have understood that he has to come up with something that would move me, instead of giving me 3 intangible wishes, in order for me to consider whether I should take the hidden risks of saving him. Mr. Dorr temporarily didn't mention this matter and instead, with great interest, chatted about my tarot card creation. Heh. The word creation should be written with quotation marks. From this point, it's apparent that Mr. Dorr is able to make contact with the real world at particular times and through particular methods, and he should be able to observe a lot of details. While talking about the moon card, I thought of a matter Zeradal mentioned. He said that the life school of thought worships the moon, but not the Evernight goddess. Yes, I added the second half myself. Hence, I asked the 4th epic expert, Mr. Dorr, about this question. He chuckled and similarly didn't give a direct answer. However, compared to the furtive seer who speaks half-truths, making me want to beat him up, he's a lot more frank. He told me that if he were to choose a card from the tarot cards to represent the Evernight goddess, he wouldn't choose the moon, but the star. That makes things very interesting. I pressed, who is the real owner of the moon? His reply was even more worthy of relish. He said with a laugh that the moon currently has no owner. If I didn't misunderstand him, then he means that the peak of the moon's pathway is empty. The sequence 0 is empty. That's not right. Isn't there a primordial moon? Upon seeing this, Klein suddenly had this thought. He had already anticipated that the moon card didn't represent the goddess. Whether it was the faith of the life school of thought, the attitude of the vampires, or the records in the Book of Secrets, they all vaguely pointed out that Evernight wasn't the moon. In contrast, vampire ancestor Lilith and the primordial moon resembled the sequence 0 of this pathway in more ways. According to the City of Silver's history lessons, Lilith had most likely fallen in the Dark Epic, the 2nd epic. However, the primordial moon was an existence that people still believed in and sent responses to even to this day. Of course, those who prayed to her wouldn't end up well. Why did Mr. Dorr say that the moon had no owner at the moment? As seen from the Book of Secrets, the primordial moon still existed during the 4th epic. Klein almost frowned. Soon, he came up with 3 guesses. First, Mr. Dorr didn't know enough about the hidden primordial moon, but that was a very low possibility. Second, that the primordial moon was actually the disguise of another deity, not essentially occupying the position of the moon's sequence 0 pathway. Third, that she was a sequence 1 of the moon's pathway or was in disguise and had the corresponding sealed artifact. And one more possibility, it's the response from the moon pathway's uniqueness. Klein muttered silently. The most important Beyonder ingredient in the sequence 0 potion formula described by the Dark Emperor card wasn't all of the sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics, but something called uniqueness. Different pathways had different uniquenesses. A true god was unique. Other than the first guess, the other possibilities aren't small. What is the Beyonder pathway of the moon? Klein turned to the 2nd page of the diary and was lucky enough to discover that it was connected to the previous page. I continued pressing, but Mr. Dorr refused to say more. He thinks that I'll rescue him by whetting my appetite? Dream on. I hid my curiosity and scoffed at Mr. Dorr for not being respectful enough to true gods. He casually replied to me. This is the attitude a 4th epic noble has to the deities. This guy is too good at acting. However, I really am interested in the nobility of the 4th epic, so I took the opportunity to ask. Mr. Dorr told me that in the Tudor dynasty, there were 5 noble families: Abraham, Antigonus, Ammon, Tamara, and Jacob. Each family was known as an angel family, and they possessed tremendously terrifying strength. Angel family, just the name itself raises many problems. It really makes one yearn for it. Mr. Dorr said that the number of angel families in the 4th epic exceeded the 5. There were the Zeradal and Zoroast family, which had always been loyal to the Solomon Empire, the Augustus, Sauron, Einhorn, Castilla families of the Trunsoist dynasty, and the furtive Anariel and Beria families, as well as the Demonis family which stemmed from a true goddess which was one step up from the angel families. So the last winner of the fourth epoch was the Trunsoist dynasty, but where did their royal family go? The four angel families, Augustus, Sauron, and the others, divided up the northern continent. Just as Mr. Dorr said the previous time, the strongest powerhouses in the fourth epoch far exceeds my imagination. However, most of them have been buried in the ashes of history. Even the Sauron family has waned, destroyed by me. In another 1 to 2 millennia, perhaps the Augustus family might no longer exist. Only the true gods appear capable of forever illuminating the real world. Although some deities perished in the fourth epoch, they should only be few in number. This makes me think of something that was previously written in a web novel which I memorized. It can be used here with some changes. Ashes await those who fail to become true gods. After the communication period ended, Mr. Dorr disconnected. He's like a prisoner who's released on parole for a fixed period of time. And he does know a lot. When he mentioned the Zeradal family, there was faint contempt in his tone. Perhaps I need to maintain my relationship with Mr. Dorr. Apart from the Church of the God of Steam, Zeradal, and that secret and ancient organization, I should leave another outlet. Unlike the saying, a wily hare has far more than 3 holes. When Emperor Roselle was struggling in the end, he was only thinking about the organization that's suspected to be the Twilight Hermit Order. He didn't mention Mr. Dorr at all. Something apparently happened in between. So the ancestor of the lone royal family, the Augustus family, was actually so rich and powerful to be an angel family. However, why did the royal family of the Trunsoist dynasty, to which they were loyal to, disappear just like that? Klein suddenly thought of a few things, and his desire to clear away the fog that shrouded the history of the fourth epoch and see its true appearance grew. This was also the greatest hobby of his body's original owner. Perhaps, that underground relic with 2 side-by-side seats and a terrifying evil spirit will help me answer a lot of questions. Klein lowered his gaze and flipped to the 3rd page. June 2nd, Bernadette massaged my back. It's good to have a daughter. She knows to care for her old father, and although I can see what she wants at a glance, at least she's willing to put on an act. Besides, she did a good job. I asked her which Beyonder pathway she wanted. She said she was undecided, but she liked the maxim of do as you wish, but do no harm. June 3rd. I saw Florin again. He's very different from before, as though he's a different person. No, he still had his original memories and some of his distinctive characteristics, which is enough to prove that he's him. What exactly happened to him to experience such a huge change? Perhaps a metaphor could be used to describe it more precisely. Some monsters are physical sutures, while he is a monster of mental sutures. June 5th. I obtained an ancient book. It actually mentions the primordial demoness name, not one of an honorific name. Her name is Cheek, but that's a man's name. Is this ancient book fake?